Chapter 468. Mo Tienga's attitude was so indifferent that everyone felt it was strange. Late nascent soul cultivators didn't mind, but she was only in the core formation realm. Although she was only a step away from the nascent soul realm, this step was like heaven and earth. How could she not care about the cultivation technique inside? But since she proposed this, no one objected because they felt they couldn't find any fault with it. Drawing lots was inevitable to lose the demeanor of a late nascent soul cultivator. In the end, everyone randomly chose a transporting formation. Repairing the transporting formation wasn't too difficult for the nascent soul cultivators. It only took them a little time to repair the relatively intact transporting formations, put spirit stones in them, and teleported into them. It was only after everyone else impatiently left the transporting formation that Mo Tienga slowly put down the last spirit stone, then pulled Xianxia towards the transporting formation. A white light flashed, and in an instant, the two of them appeared in a strange room. This was a spacious hall, slightly smaller than the hall outside. On the top of the hall, there was a huge bead floating in the air, shining with a bright but gentle light, illuminating the windowless hall as if it were daytime. Inside the hall, there were neatly arranged purple-red bookshelves, emitting the fragrance of spirit wood. All kinds of books and jade slips were placed on the shelves, and there was a faint restrictive light on the surface of the bookshelves, which blocked divine sense. Mo Tienga looked up and said casually, "This bead is good. It's been so many years, but it's still shining. If we take it back, it'll be much better than moonstones." "Don't even think about it," Fu Yaozi said. "This bead is directly connected to the spirit vein here, which is why it hasn't been extinguished for more than 100,000 years. It'll be a waste if you take it." Mo Tienga wiped her sweat. She was just thinking about it casually. She sensed for a moment and didn't find any offensive restrictions around them. Feeling relieved, he turned around and asked, "Tienga, what are you planning? Which stacks are we in?" Mo Tienga showed a bitter smile and said, "Do you think I did it on purpose? In that situation, what else could we do but retreat? They're all stronger than us." Xianxia was silent. If they really fought, he didn't think he was much worse than those late nascent soul cultivators. However, those people had lived hundreds or thousands of years longer than him and had rich experience in fights of magical powers. He wouldn't be able to gain an advantage. However, it's really not a big deal. She smiled and said, "Of the 5 book vaults, choosing the first 2 would be a great advantage, but we don't lack cultivation techniques. No matter which one we choose, we won't lose anything." Xianxia thought about it and agreed. Both of their cultivation methods were inherited from the ancient times and even the primordial era. Although they didn't have the content of the soul formation stage, with their special constitutions, it wasn't practical for them to change to other cultivation methods. It was better to cultivate to the late nascent soul realm and create their own cultivation methods. Mo Tienga didn't immediately check the bookshelves. Instead, she turned around and laid a formation next to the transporting formation they just came from. This array was no ordinary trapping array. It was a killing array that was listed as one of the 10 most vicious arrays in the Xuanji array book. Even if a nascent soul cultivator were to enter, he would not be able to escape unscathed. She was not the only one who did this. The first thing the others did after entering the library was to set up defensive measures, lest someone went back on their word and followed them with malicious intent. While she was laying the formation, Xianxia walked forward and took a book from the purple-red bookshelf in the front. The books on this bookshelf were the lowest level aura refining cultivation techniques. Sensing their cultivation levels, the restrictions on the bookshelf didn't activate, allowing them to take the book away. Rudimentary pill concocting? Xianxia opened the book and looked up with a smile. "It seems we didn't get a good draw, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Spells of the 5 elements, cultivation techniques, martial cultivation path, miscellaneous knowledge of pills and tools, and notes on experiences. Among these 5 categories, the book vault containing spells of the 5 elements and cultivation techniques was naturally the most valuable. Spells of the 5 elements were used in fights of magical powers, and cultivation techniques were related to the most fundamental cultivation and advancement, but the others weren't completely useless. Martial cultivation was a branch of cultivators. It was once glorious in the Middle Ages. Many Middle Ages sects had complete martial cultivation techniques, including sword cultivation, body cultivation, and so on. The value of this book vault was slightly lower than the other two, but it was still quite useful. In the eyes of martial cultivators, this book vault was the most valuable. As for the other two categories, they seemed to be the least valuable at first glance, but they also had a chance to win the big prize. For example, Notes on Experiences, which recorded strange things in the cultivation world, illustrated books on spiritual treasures, and cultivation experiences of cultivators. If one could find a way to advance to the deification realm from these books, its value was likely to surpass the other two. As for miscellaneous knowledge of pills and tools, it might be dispensable for other people. This was because many of the spiritual plants and objects that existed in the Middle Ages were already extinct today. Without raw materials, even if one knew the methods of pill concocting and tool refining, one couldn't cook a meal without rice. This was also the reason why many ancient pill recipes lost their value. In this book vault, perhaps the valuable books were the ones that recorded talisman techniques and formations, but these were all side paths and were of no help in advancing to the deification realm. However, these were all relative to other people. For the two of them, it was completely different. Because Immortal had the virtual sky world. There were many extinct spiritual plants in the virtual sky world. Because of the lack of pill recipes, Immortal could only let them grow and die on their own and couldn't use them. Those rumored spiritual plants were easy for her to obtain, so it would be much easier to collect the spiritual plants required for these ancient pill recipes. Even if some supplementary materials were missing, with the amount of spiritual plants in the virtual sky world and the two of them, they could try to improve them. This Immortal Palace was a great ancient sect that might have a great ascension cultivator, so it was very likely that it had peerless pill recipes for advancing to the deification realm. If they could really find them, they would be priceless treasures. Immortal already knew what was stored in this book vault. When everyone chose the transporting formation, Fu Yaozi already told her. After arranging the formation, he walked over. How is it? This ancient pill concocting technique is no different from today's, right? Qin she read quickly and said with a smile, there's not much difference. However, although this book is only for beginners, it's very useful. There are some ancient books in the virtual sky world that we can't understand. This beginner's pill concocting book has detailed explanations for some basic techniques. That's a pleasant surprise. There were many ancient books left by the previous generation of cultivators in the virtual sky world, but because of the changes in the cultivation world, the two of them couldn't understand many of the contents. Even if they had pill recipes, they couldn't concoct some spiritual pills. Now, this beginner's pill concocting book just solved this fundamental problem. Upon discovering this, the two of them were overjoyed and began to immerse themselves in searching for useful books. The jade slip from the administrative department of Buddhist texts said that all the books in this book vault couldn't be taken away and could be copied using identity cards. The number of ancient books that could be copied was also different according to one's cultivation level. They didn't have identity cards, and there were complicated restrictions in this book vault that couldn't be copied directly. This restriction was related to the foundation of this book vault, so it should have been set up by the cultivators with the highest cultivation levels in this great ancient sect. It wasn't something they could break with their cultivation levels. Therefore, they could only use the stupidest method, forcibly take away the useful books. In this way, they had to act according to their abilities. It was impossible to take away all the books because breaking the restrictions wasn't a simple matter. The two of them discussed for a while and decided to break the highest level books first. There wasn't only one room in the book vault. At the end, there was a small transporting formation. After putting down a spirit stone, they could enter the next room. The first room contained aura refining books, the second room contained foundation building books, and so on. According to Fu Yaozi, he once entered a deification realm room. Although they were only one realm apart, the difference in strength was like heaven and earth. The restrictions inside weren't something they could break, so they could only give up. Therefore, when they reached the room containing nascent soul's secret books, the two of them stopped and she began to search. In the first room, there were as many aura-refining books as there was an ocean, but in the second and third rooms, there were fewer books. In the fourth room, there were even fewer nascent soul books. Even so, it still took Xianxia more than an hour to go through all the ancient books and records. This trip wasn't in vain. Xianxia said to Immortal with a happy expression after he withdrew his divine sense from a jade slip. Since he rarely showed such a happy expression, Immortal asked, "What did you find?" Xianxia waved the jade slip in his hand and said, "This book is called Returning to Truth in Tao of Alchemy. It records the lifelong knowledge of an ancient master of alchemy, including pill concocting techniques and recipes for many miraculous pills. One of them is called the deification pill." Deification pill. Not only was Mo Tiange surprised, but Fu Yaozi on the Fusheng sword was also startled. Xianxia said with a smile, "You should be able to understand the use of this pill from its name, right? When you cultivate to the peak of the late stage of the nascent soul realm and try to break through to the deification realm, it can help you form your soul." Mo Tiange calmed down and asked hurriedly, "What about the required spiritual plants?" Xianxia looked at it again and said hesitantly, "We can collect most of them, but there are some that we've never heard of." This was inevitable. No matter how many spiritual plants there were in the virtual sky world, it was impossible to collect all the spiritual plants in the world. Moreover, for a miraculous pill like the deification pill, the spiritual plants it needed must be rare treasures. "There's no need to hurry. Not to mention that I haven't formed my nascent soul, even for you, it's not easy to advance from the middle stage to the peak of the late stage. With our lifespans, we have plenty of time to search slowly." At that moment, Fu Yaozi sighed. "I didn't expect there would be a pill recipe for the deification pill in this library. Unfortunately, the five of us were on guard against each other back then, so we couldn't check them one by one and missed it." The two of them were very satisfied after finding the pill recipe for the deification pill. Under Fu Yaozi's guidance, they spent another 4 hours to break the restrictions and take these books and jade slips from this room. Xianxia had consumed a lot of spiritual aura when he left the fourth room, so he had to adjust his breathing first. Fortunately, the spiritual pills Mo Tiange prepared were sufficient. It only took her less than an hour to almost fully recover. The third room was filled with books for the core formation realm, so Mo Tiange could also help. Although there were many books, her speed was faster. Moreover, she was already familiar with the method of breaking the restrictions, so she only spent 2 hours. The first 2 rooms were even faster. Aura refining and foundation building realm books weren't of much use to them, so they only found a few basic ancient books before they left. Chapter 469. When they came out of the library, the hall was empty without a single person. This palace was extremely vast, with many buildings and complicated paths. Coupled with the overflowing primordial devil aura, it wasn't easy for others to find the scripture pavilion. It didn't take long for their group to reach this place. Mo Tiange and Xianxia had only stayed in the library for about 6 to 8 hours. Now that the passage to the celestial parting palace had been opened, it had only been a day, so it was impossible for other people to find this place. The others hadn't come out yet, so the two of them could only wait. They sat cross-legged and adjusted their breaths to restore their spiritual aura. Before long, the leftmost transporting formation lit up, and Ling Xiu of Juyen's sect appeared. He was surprised to see the two people meditating on the side. "Fellow Daoists, you came out so early?" Seeing people coming out, the two of them stood up. Xianxia said, "It's fellow Daoist Ling. What's wrong? You're done too?" Ling Xiu nodded and calmly threw a talisman into the transporting formation. After a while, the others also appeared in the hall through the transporting formation. Mo Tiange saw this and secretly curled her lips. The people of Juyen's sect were really cautious. Ling Xiu's move was obviously because he was worried someone would set up an ambush outside, so he came out to check the situation first and only informed the people behind him to come out when there was nothing wrong. Among the 4 of them, Ling Yunhe was the most important. His cultivation level was low, and he was the master of the holy object, so no accident could happen to him. The other two were late-stage nascent soul cultivators and were their main fighting force. He was the least important person, so he came out to check the situation. In fact, they were a bit too cautious. The possibility of falling out now wasn't big. There was still a long way to go before they left the library, so what was this little benefit? However, Ling Yunfei once said that Zhuyan's sect was different from other sects and valued friendship among fellow disciples the most. Looking at their behavior now, it should be true. Ling Shiyu's move was to pave the way for his fellow disciples. If there was an accident, he would be the first to be sacrificed, but he seemed willing. Fellow Daoist Qin, little friend Mo, you two came out early. Master Daoist Yuanmu was surprised to see them. Qin, she said with a smile, we were unlucky. That library was of no value, so of course we came out early. Really? Master Daoist Yuanmu seemed to be in a very good mood, so he didn't say anything more. After a while, people came out of the other three transporting formations one after another. Some people were beaming with joy, while others looked gloomy. However, everyone tacitly kept their mouths shut about which library they had chosen. Those who had won the lottery did not want to reveal their wealth, and those who were unlucky did not want to mention it. The matter of Scripture Pavilion was over. Everyone had their gains, so they continued to search for the library. Before he left, Perfected Yuanmu pondered for a moment and casually cast a spell to destroy the 5 teleportation arrays before leaving the Scripture Depository. Daoist Yuanmu and the Formation Sect. They had spent a lot of effort to come to the Sutra Depository Pavilion, but they had only obtained a few opportunities. If someone else came here by coincidence, they would not easily let them take away the treasures. In Yunzhong, they were competitors. On the way back, the Ghostcraft Demon Lord suddenly asked, what happened to Mount Numinous back then? Soul, the Lin Soul, Emperor with Realm, he with S Mountain with Nascent Ling, with Nascent's Cultivators Sect. Space cracks like this weren't the only place in the world, but it was rare to find a place as vast as Spirit Mountain that contained an entire sect. Moreover, this mountain was obviously the base of a big sect. Judging from its size, it had at least tens of thousands of disciples. However, after they entered, they didn't find any trace of other people except for some corpses that had become refined corpses. Mo Tiange paused for a moment before she said, Senior Fu Yaozi once speculated that this spiritual mountain was probably torn apart during the great changes in the world back then. At that time, the righteous path and the devil path were at war, and the human world collapsed. This great ancient sect also came to an end and only had a few disciples left. In the end, the world changed and they were buried here forever. Scholar Yu nodded and said, Senior Fu Yaozi's conjecture is very reasonable. Only a powerful force from the upheaval of heaven and earth could tear apart such a huge spirit mountain. At this point, he lightly tapped the folding fan in his hand and looked worried. He sighed and said, Look at this immortal palace on Spirit Mountain. Back then, this great ancient sect was so prosperous, but after the world changed, it turned into a dead city in the blink of an eye. In the eyes of the cultivators of this sect, we, the so-called top great cultivators, are insignificant. If we encounter the same thing one day, we'll be like ants, unable to even struggle. In the end, Scholar Yu's voice became so soft that it was almost inaudible. Among them, which one of them didn't go through hardships to cultivate to the late stage of the nascent soul realm? In the eyes of the world, they were unreachable great cultivators in the late stage of the nascent soul realm who had the ability to move mountains and drain seas. However, in front of the laws of heaven and earth, they were nothing more than ants, so insignificant that they weren't even worth mentioning. Influenced by Scholar Yu's tone, the great cultivators all fell silent. Everyone carried their own thoughts and walked forward in silence. Inside this immortal palace, there were restrictions laid by unimaginably high-level cultivators and primordial devil aura that leaked out of nowhere. If they just walked inside, it wouldn't be too dangerous. After all, this was a sect, not some dangerous place. The group of 12 people followed Mo Tiange for another half a day. They gradually left the pavilion and entered the mountain. When they could no longer see the pavilions, Mo Tiange finally stopped. Seniors, we've arrived. Upon hearing her voice, all the cultivators looked up with puzzled expressions. When they looked up, there was only an ordinary mountain wall in front of them. There were no buildings or traces of formations. However, with his experience in the Sutra Pavilion, Scholar Yu didn't immediately make a conclusion. Instead, he took out a formation plate and very carefully examined it before he turned to the others and said, "It's an illusory formation." Upon hearing this, the others' expressions became solemn. They could more or less see some clues about the restrictions in the Sutra Pavilion, but this illusory formation, even with their cultivation levels, they couldn't sense it at all. How could they break it? Scholar Yu looked troubled. After thinking for a long time, he still couldn't think of a way to break it, so he could only turn his gaze to Mo Tienga. Little friend Mo, Senior 5 Saints once broke this illusory formation. Presumably, Senior Fu Yaozi knows how to break it. Little friend Mo, please consult Senior Fu Yaozi. Mo Tienga naturally had no reason to refuse this request. If she couldn't break this illusory formation, she wouldn't get any benefits. After Mo Tienga nodded in agreement, she stopped talking. Everyone knew she was communicating with Fu Yaozi, so they all waited quietly. After a while, Mo Tienga exhaled, looked up and said to Scholar Yu, "Senior, this illusory formation is incomplete." Scholar Yu was surprised. "We can't see through this illusory formation at all. It's actually incomplete?" If that was the case, didn't that mean Senior 5 Saints' attainments in formations far surpassed theirs? Senior Fu Yaozi said this illusory formation was set up by an expert from this great ancient sect. If it was complete, we wouldn't be able to see through it. However, when Senior 5 Saints came here, he found that this illusory formation already had a loophole after a long time, so he discovered the existence of the storehouse. Hearing this, the others looked happy. It would have been fine if they didn't know about it, but now that they knew there was a storehouse here, they couldn't enter it. It was really like entering a treasure mountain only to return empty-handed. That would be too depressing. But before Scholar Yu could speak, Mo Tienga continued, "Before we open the illusory formation, I'm afraid there are some things I have to clarify with seniors." Master Daoist Yuanmu narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Little friend Mo and Senior Fu Yaozi, please don't hesitate to state your conditions." At this time, with such a tone, the people present weren't fools, so they already understood what she wanted to say. After entering the storehouse, there would almost certainly be friction between them. At that time, those who were weaker would suffer some losses. Mo Tienga, on the other hand, had offended them before. Now, although there were nascent soul cultivators by her side, her strength was inferior to theirs, so she naturally had to make a plan for herself. Of course, if her request wasn't too excessive, the great cultivators present wouldn't disagree. After all, she had put in a lot of effort along the way. If it wasn't for her, it would have been very difficult to find the scripture pavilion and the storeroom within 3 days. Mo Tienga said with a smile, "Seniors, I'm afraid you don't know, but this storehouse is a space-tearing technique. There's an independent space inside." "So?" Scholar Yu asked. "The special thing about this space is that it's very stable. The flow of spiritual aura is almost stagnant, so medicinal pills and other things can be preserved for a long time." Master Daoist Yuanmu's eyes lit up. "So, there might be intact ancient medicinal pills inside?" "Yes," Mo Tienga said. Mo Tienga said, "Back then, when Senior 5 Saints entered, there were indeed intact medicinal pills. This was also one of their fated chances. However, the characteristics of this space led to another problem." Scholar Yu narrowed his eyes and pondered. All of a sudden, he took a deep breath. "It seems Senior Yu has already thought of it." "Correct." Scholar Yu's tone was heavy. "The spiritual aura is almost stagnant, and the space is very stable. In that case, the restrictions inside the storehouse are probably intact." "Exactly." Mo Tienga sighed and said, "The storehouse must have been set up by the top great cultivators of this distant past cultivation group. If it's intact, with our cultivation levels, we can't imagine what we can do." Upon hearing this, the others' expressions changed. In other words, even if they broke the illusory formation outside, They couldn't touch the restrictions inside the storehouse at all. Little friend Imo, revered Wu Ming said with a smile, since Senior Five Saints could take the treasures from the storehouse back then, there must have been a loophole they could exploit, right? Correct. Upon hearing this, Master Daoist Yuan Mu's expression became a little better. But I wonder what method they used? It's very simple, Imo Tiange said, to get the storehouse identity card. Chapter 470. Identity Tablet. Master Daoist Yuan Mu muttered to himself. If they had the identity tablet, they would naturally be able to enter the storehouse unimpeded and would be safe. However, this distant past era's big sect had been destroyed for more than 100,000 years. Where would they get the storehouse identity tablet? Every important item like the storehouse identity tablet was either kept in an important place of the sect with layers of restrictions or in the hands of important figures. They didn't have the slightest clue about this. Little friend Imo, do you mean you know where the storehouse identity tablet is? Demon Monarch Guifeng asked. Imo Tiange didn't hesitate and straightforwardly admitted it, but she didn't continue. Everyone present was smart. They knew this was her bargaining chip. If things were really as she said, this bargaining chip was too important. No matter who it was, they would definitely raise the price. If it was before, Imo Tiange wouldn't have the capital to raise any conditions under the suppression of absolute strength. But now, she also had powerful nascent soul cultivators behind her, so her weight was much greater. She also had the confidence to raise her conditions. At least this time, Yu Shusheng couldn't say, "What qualifications do you have to talk about conditions?" Master Daoist Yuan Mu said in a deep voice, "Little friend Imo, if you have something to say, please speak frankly." In any case, the weight of these late nascent soul cultivators wasn't small. This junior wasn't a fool and wouldn't speak without thinking. As long as the conditions weren't too excessive, they could accept them. Imo Tiange smiled. "Seniors, please don't blame me. Junior is just a bit timid. Being together with seniors is very stressful." Yu Shusheng narrowed his eyes and closed his folding fan. He asked, "You want to enter the storehouse alone?" To be exact, Junior wants to be the first to enter the storehouse. Under the sharp gazes of the nascent soul cultivators, Imo Tiange remained calm and didn't shrink back. For a moment, the nascent soul cultivators didn't answer. Everyone looked pensive. The first person to enter the storehouse would get the best treasures. There was no need to say more about the benefits. If she was alone, her tone would have been a bit too arrogant, but with Xianxia here, Master Daoist Yuan Mu couldn't help but glance at Xianxia. Xianxia's expression was calm as if he didn't care, but he was standing in a very good position to protect Imo Tiange. Master Daoist Yuan Mu furrowed his brows, feeling a headache. How could it be so coincidental that fellow Daoist Qin arrived just before they entered the mystic area? If it was like before, even if this little friend Imo had Fu Yaozi's divine sense protecting her, she wouldn't have dared to make such a request. Previously, she had also said that she only wanted a share of the pie. However, things were different now. Of course, if all of them joined forces, it wouldn't be difficult for a mid-nascent soul stage cultivator, no matter how powerful his divine abilities were. But the problem was, in the face of benefits, they had to keep each other in check. How could they possibly join forces? Besides, killing a nascent soul cultivator wasn't easy. If one couldn't kill a nascent soul cultivator as well, there would be no end of trouble in the future. Therefore, even if there was enmity between nascent soul cultivators, it was very restrained. "Little friend Imo, your conditions are acceptable." Demon Monarch Guifeng was the first to speak. Apart from Imo Tiange and Xianxia, his relationship with the other three teams was the most estranged. Even though they usually coexisted peacefully and Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism were considered the righteous path after all, but at critical moments, they were still opposing his devil path. Under this kind of situation, he was suppressed by the other three teams and was more inclined to side with Imo Tiange. After a short pause, he continued to say, "However, if you're the first to enter, all the treasures in this storehouse will be taken by you. Won't we be at a disadvantage?" But this kind of bias also had to ensure their own benefits. "That's right." Yu Shusheng also said coldly, This condition is too difficult to accept. Seniors, don't be in a hurry to refuse, Xianxia said calmly. To tell you the truth, seniors, storehouse tokens aren't omnipotent. Each token can only allow one person to enter and exit at a time. At most, they can only take away one treasure. Seniors, how many tokens do you think this junior can take? And how many treasures can I take? How could the seniors have nothing to take from the storehouse of such an ancient sect just because the juniors had taken a few treasures first? I'm afraid when the time comes, seniors won't know what to pick. Are you serious? Master Daoist Yuan Mu asked cautiously. If each token could only take one treasure, this condition wasn't that big of a deal. Just as she said, no matter how bad it was impossible for this great ancient sect's storehouse to only have one or two treasures that were pleasing to the eye. That's right. If Senior Yuan Mu doesn't believe me, we can verify it after we get the tokens. If things were really as Xianxia said, this condition wasn't so difficult to accept. This way, the two of them wouldn't be able to take many treasures. At most, they would immediately flee after leaving the storehouse to ensure their own safety. As for setting up an ambush outside, presumably, they wouldn't do such a stupid thing in front of 5 late nascent soul stage cultivators. Alright, I have no objections. The first to speak was actually Yu Shusheng. He was actually able to let go. His expression was calm, without the slightest bit of unwillingness. Master Daoist Yuan Mu and Master Daoist Tai Mian glanced at each other, then slowly nodded. Since both sides agreed, needless to say, Venerable Wuming and Devil Monarch Geifang naturally agreed. However, before Xianxia could speak, Devil Monarch Geifang beat her to it and said, "Wait. Little friend Imo, apart from using the tokens, is there really no other way to deal with the restrictions in this storehouse?" This sentence sounded very simple on the surface, but in fact, it contained another meaning. If she hid some kind of trick and was the first to enter, the two of them would take all the treasures and immediately flee after coming out. In that case, wouldn't all of them be fooled? Xianxia understood, so she answered, "If seniors don't believe me, you can break the illusory formation and see if the restrictions in this storehouse are as I said. They're simply unbreakable. Seniors, you're all top-notch great cultivators in the human realm. Needless to say, your attainments in formations need not be mentioned. Even if the senior 5 saints back then were much more powerful than all of you, they still wouldn't be able to break through the restrictions of their realms." After hearing what she said, everyone was silent for a while. Xianxia's words weren't unreasonable. The gap between the nascent soul realm and the deification realm was very clear to these old monsters who had lived for thousands of years. The lower their realms, the smaller the gap between the two realms. With the help of treasures, aura-refining cultivators might be able to compete with foundation-building cultivators. A core formation cultivator, if they were talented enough, could also catch up with a nascent soul cultivator. However, the gap between the nascent soul realm and the deification realm was like heaven and earth. If the restrictions were for cultivators above the deification realm, they definitely wouldn't be able to break them. "All right." Devil Monarch Geifang muttered to himself for a while, then said, "I'll believe you this time." Everyone reached a consensus. Xianxia said, "Senior 5 saints searched for ancient books and records in this sect. During the Great War between the righteous path and the devil path, the elders all had several storehouse tokens in their hands as rewards for their disciples. In the end, those elders couldn't escape the calamity and were buried in the Immortal Palace. We only need to find the corpses of the elders of this sect and we'll be able to find the storehouse tokens." "How are we going to identify them?" Yu Shusheng asked. Moreover, since they were elders, their cultivation levels must be outstanding. Those refined corpses we encountered earlier were at most in the nascent soul realm, but they were already so hard to deal with. If those elders also turned into refined corpses, Senior Fiazi said that the Immortal's caves of these elders were independent of the small peaks. "Seniors, please take a look. Most of the independent peaks around us have Immortal's caves of the elders." Xianxia paused for a moment, then continued to answer, "Junior doesn't dare to say that those elders didn't turn into refined corpses. However, this is definitely a minority. Seniors, You must know better than Junior how coincidental the formation of naturally refined corpses is. In short, if they happened to find elders who turned into refined corpses, they could only consider themselves unlucky. Master Daoist Yuan Mu nodded. It seems Senior Fuyazi already told little friend Mo about this. Presumably, based on this senior's character, he wouldn't play tricks on us, the younger generation from 100,000 years later. He then turned towards Mo Tiange. Little friend Mo, in that case, should we split up and look for the tokens? Mo Tiange smiled and said, Junior doesn't dare to decide this. Seniors, you can do whatever you think is appropriate. Upon hearing what she said, the several nascent soul cultivators couldn't help but criticize her in their hearts. Along the way, did she not decide many things? Relying on Fuyazi's support, she didn't hesitate to order them around. Unfortunately, they didn't have much information, so they had to listen to her. Now that this matter was right in front of them, the more tokens they could find, the more treasures they could obtain. This was something they absolutely couldn't share with others. Their group had so many great cultivators with amazing divine abilities. If a dispute arose, it would be difficult to handle. Splitting up to look for tokens was the most suitable method. As for Mo Tiange, they already had no need to worry about her. If she had a way by herself, she wouldn't have brought so many people to the storehouse. At most, she would have just taken advantage of the situation. This was unavoidable. Who told her to have the best fated chance and run into Fuyazi? If she really obtained an amazing fated chance, it wouldn't be too late for them to make a move then. Everyone quickly reached an agreement. After asking about the characteristics of the tokens and setting a time to meet, they all left. Out of the 3 days, 1 day had already passed. There were only 2 days left. Everyone had their own thoughts, but they all tacitly agreed to stay for 1 day to deal with their personal matters, so they agreed to meet here 1 day later. Once the others were far away, she couldn't help but ask, Tiange, are you really, after being separated for 50 years, now that they met again he realized he could no longer see through her thoughts at first glance, and he also didn't need to give her pointers one by one. In the past 50 years, she had grown a lot. From her cultivation level to her behavior, she had the demeanor of a high-level cultivator. In front of these late nascent soul cultivators, she always maintained her composure and was neither servile nor overbearing. This was a good thing, he thought. The current Mo Tiange was only 1 step away from the nascent soul realm. As long as she advanced to the nascent soul realm, she would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with him. As dual cultivation partners, the closer their cultivation levels were, the longer they could stay together. A mysterious smile appeared on Mo Tiange's face along with a rare playfulness. She winked at him and said, I didn't lie at all, but she had to hold something back to live up to the fated chance given to her by the heavens. Who told her to be so lucky to obtain the life revival sword and Fuyazi's inheritance? Then what are we going to do next? He asked. He was very curious about what she was hiding. Of course we're going to look for tokens. Mo Tiange smiled. I'm telling the truth. Chapter 471. It was easy to say but difficult to find the tokens for the storehouses in the Immortal's caves on the surrounding small peaks. Because there were Immortal's caves on the small peaks, it wasn't hard to find them. Although there weren't many cultivators who entered the Immortal Palace, there were still a lot of them. If they ran into each other, there would inevitably be some conflicts. In the face of fated chances, the friendship of inviting them to a grand meeting was not worth mentioning. Besides, the 3 groups had been forced to announce the secret space in the sea of returning ruins. How could those old and shrewd cultivators be grateful to them? Previously, when they entered the Immortal Palace, they had already given them face. As he followed the 3 elders, Ling Yunhe pondered for a long time and finally asked, Martial uncles, great-grandfather, do you really believe what fellow Daoist Mo said? Upon hearing his question, Master Daoist Yuan Mu tilted his head to look at him and said meaningfully, You finally lived up to our expectations of you by asking this question. Ling Yunhe was startled. Seeing this, Ling Xiu patted his shoulder with a smile and said to Master Daoist Yuan Mu, Senior Martial Brother Yuan Mu, there's no need to worry about my boy's Dao heart. Master Daoist Yuanmu also smiled but didn't say anything. He said to Ling Yunhe gently, "Cultivation is not easy. At our realm, we have to cherish our lives even more. Even if there are benefits in front of us, we have to make trade-offs." That junior might not have nothing to hide, but as she said, with her realm in front of her, there are some things she can't deceive even if she wanted to. Without real benefits, there's no need to push her too hard. After all, she's not alone now. Besides, you know what our biggest goal is, Master Daoist Iron Mask said indifferently. Ling Yunhe was slightly startled, but then he nodded cautiously. Decades ago, when the Heavenly Demon Tower appeared, he already knew what kind of secret the Jueyun sect's founder left behind. Later, when the 5 holy objects appeared one after another and he obtained the soul-restraining pearl's recognition, he finally entered the core of Jueyun sect as a core formation cultivator. The matter of the Sea of Returning Ruins couldn't be lost. The fated chance left behind by the founder was related to the rise and fall of Jueyun sect for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. It was precisely because he knew how important this matter was that he very well put away his petty thoughts and simply stood in the position of the Jueyun sect's leader to handle matters. He had thought that no one would know about his little thoughts, but it turned out that even the elders knew about it. He could honestly admit that after their trip to Carefree Valley that year, he already regarded Xianxia in a new light, so he didn't want to oppose her and tried his best to leave her a way out. But that was all. This was a strange feeling. He had once thought about it carefully. Perhaps the title of genius that he had carried on his back since he was young was too heavy. Even his best friends and closest brothers were unable to share his burden and even turned against him in the end. Xianxia, on the other hand, was very sharp and reliable. She could always see everything clearly, but she never said anything. Just as he had said, she was a person who could not be bullied. She was a safe person, a person who could make him relax. If she had been a man, he would certainly have taken her as a confidant, but she was not, so he began to have some ideas. This was because the path of cultivation was too lonely. Regardless of whether it was a close friend or a Dao companion, they were both rare and precious. However, a close friend would not last as long as a Dao companion. However, all of this was not important. It was not only because she already had a Dao companion, but also because he realized that there was a difference between them in the end. He, Ling Yunhe, was now the head of Jueyun sect. In the future, he would be the pillar of Jueyun sect. He had to support the sect and lead countless disciples. As for Xianxia, she might also have an illustrious master in the distant outer endless sea, but obviously, even if she had a master, she was more inclined to pursue the path to immortality. Therefore, on the path to immortality, she walked faster and more freely than he did. After understanding this, he felt relieved. They were not suitable people even without Qin Shoujing. His little thoughts were because he was lonely, but on the path of cultivation, who wouldn't be lonely? What he needed was to cultivate his mental state, not to find a Dao companion. Thinking of this, Ling Yunhe smiled softly. Perhaps, from another perspective, he should thank Xianxia. This feeling of sudden enlightenment made his mental state have a breakthrough. Now that things had come to this, Xianxia might not necessarily be unable to be friends with him, but there was no need to force her. If there were no conflicts of interest on this trip, maybe when they met again in the future, they could be bosom friends, but if there were conflicts, Master Daoist Yuanmu, who was about to fly to a lone peak, suddenly stopped and frowned. Someone's here. At this time, Xianxia and Qin Shi were running on the mountain road. Their destination was obviously not those Immortal's caves built on independent peaks. In this Immortal palace, there weren't many lone peaks suitable for building Immortal's caves, and every one of them was very obvious, so there would definitely be people fighting for them. The temporary passage to enter the Immortal Palace was very dangerous. Not many cultivators could pass through, but at least those in the late nascent soul stage were included. In addition to Master Daoist Yuanmu and the others, there were also 6 late nascent soul cultivators, as well as other middle stage or early stage nascent soul cultivators with amazing divine powers. There were more than a dozen groups. After entering the Immortal Palace, most of these groups, except for those who were unlucky, could find these lone peaks. An independent peak with a good spiritual aura was obviously a suitable place to build an immortal's cave. How could these nascent soul cultivators miss it? Ancient cultivators' immortals' caves had always been places of fated chances, let alone an immortal's cave that could occupy a peak in a great ancient sect. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, Mo Tiange wasn't willing to wade in these muddy waters. "We're here." Upon hearing the sound, Xianxia stopped and looked up, only to discover a desolate precipice in front of him. On the precipice, there were densely packed cave entrances every few hundred feet. Next to them was a towering rock engraved with several ancient characters, ascetic cliff. "This is..." He hesitated. Based on the name, it seemed to be a special immortal's cave for disciples to do closed-door meditation. Every decent cultivation group had an immortal's cave like this. Xianxing School had one, and even Yunwu sect had one back then. Because low-level disciples didn't have good immortal's caves, they needed a lot of spiritual aura when they wanted to do closed-door meditation, so their usual living quarters weren't enough. Therefore, the cultivation group opened an adjacent immortal's cave for low-level disciples to rent during closed-door meditation. Compared to the living quarters of low-level disciples, this kind of immortal's cave naturally had much better spiritual aura, but it still couldn't compare to the independent immortal's caves of high-level cultivators. According to reason, there shouldn't be high-level cultivators in this kind of place, and it was naturally impossible for them to have a storehouse identity tablet. "This way." Mo Tiange didn't pay attention to him and went along the small path on the side. There was a simple and crude hut halfway up the mountain. It should be the residence of the cultivator guarding this immortal's cave, and it was also the location of the protective formation. An immortal's cave for low-level disciples like this wouldn't be protected by very good formations. Besides, after so many years, it had long been dilapidated. Mo Tiange effortlessly erased the formation in this place without using any tricks. She then went up the precipice with Xianxia. Back then, Master Fu Yaozi obtained several ancient cultivators' Qiankuan bags in the Immortal Palace and learned about this ascetic cliff from them. The spiritual aura on this cliff is indeed ordinary, but there are several spiritual eyes at the top of the cliff. At first, no one knew about these spiritual eyes, but later on, they were discovered and developed into high-level special immortals' caves. Only elders and above can use them, Mo Tiange explained to him as they walked. Spiritual eyes were the few spots on a spirit vein where the spiritual aura was most concentrated. In the cultivation world, people generally believed that spirit veins were actually spiritual aura areas formed from the spiritual aura of one or several spiritual eyes. In other words, only with spiritual eyes could spirit veins form, and spiritual eyes were the center of spirit veins. However, spiritual eyes weren't that easy to find. The spiritual aura on spirit veins varied in intensity and intensity. Spiritual eyes usually existed in spots with particularly dense spiritual aura, but they couldn't be sensed as long as they were several hundred feet away from them. Therefore, not all spiritual eyes could be found. Occasionally, there would be extremely lucky middle-level disciples who accidentally found a place with spiritual eyes when they were developing their immortals' caves. "I see." Xianxia nodded lightly, then he frowned and asked, "You said this sect had already declined when this spiritual mountain was torn into an independent space, and it was also the time of the war between the righteous and the devil. Are there elders in closed-door meditation in this special immortals' cave?" "Yes, we can only rely on our luck." Mo Tiange sighed. "If there are elders in closed-door meditation, we can smoothly find the storehouse token. If there aren't any, we can only go to those elders' immortals' caves and compete with them." This was a choice they had no other choice. They didn't want to have conflicts with other people. After all, this was Yunzhong, not the celestial pole. Those who could enter Immortal Palace were all top nascent soul cultivators. They still had to deal with Master Daoist Yuanmu and the others, so it wasn't wise to waste their strength on other people. The two of them went straight to the top of the precipice. A moment later, they saw an independent immortal's cave on the top. Xianxia looked up and was surprised. "There are actually 3 spiritual eyes here?" There were 3 immortals' caves on this precipice. The two immortals' caves were separated by several miles, so the number of spiritual eyes was quite high. And it's really incredible. The spiritual aura on this spiritual mountain was so strong that it wasn't strange to have many spiritual eyes, but it was very rare to have 3 spiritual eyes in such a small area. The two of them didn't delay. As they talked, they arrived in front of the first immortal's cave. Since this immortal's cave could only be used by high-level cultivators in the cultivation group, the formation outside the door naturally couldn't be as useless as before. However, after all, tens of thousands of years had passed, and the individual defensive formations had long lost their effectiveness due to the exhaustion of spirit stones. Only some special restrictions existed as long as there was spiritual aura here. Tiange took out a compass and other things to determine the yin, yang, and 5 elements of this place. After a while, she frowned. "What's wrong?" She asked with concern. "Is it very hard to crack?" Tiange put down the compass, her expression alternating between joy and worry. "This restriction is more like a mechanism than a formation. It seems there's a technique of mechanisms in this great ancient cultivation group." Technique of mechanisms? She was shocked. He naturally knew what the technique of mechanisms was. It was a unique skill that used various spiritual objects and crystals to make puppets or machines with exquisite means to obtain power similar to that of human cultivators. At first glance, the technique of mechanisms was very similar to the technique of puppetry. However, the technique of puppetry in the cultivation world was like refining corpses. It required living people or living creatures. Moreover, to control a puppet, one's own strength must be higher than the puppet's. The technique of mechanisms was different. It didn't require living creatures. Even if it lost its master, it could still be preserved in good condition. Furthermore, it didn't have any requirements for strength. Chapter 472. Girl, is this really the art of mechanisms? Fu Yaozi was pleasantly surprised to hear what she said. Tiange pondered for a moment then answered, "Disciple isn't sure, but based on my understanding of formations and restrictions, this definitely isn't an ordinary restriction. I can only say that it's somewhat similar to the art of mechanisms." "Then quickly give it a try," Fu Yaozi urged. "If we can get the art of mechanisms from this place, it'll be a pleasant surprise." Back when she was in the foundation building realm, Tiange once witnessed the wonders of the art of mechanisms in Wanderer Ziwei's Immortal's cave. She also obtained 2 foundation building puppets from Wanderer Ziwei, so she knew the wonders of this ancient technique. Now, even without Fu Yaozi's instructions, she was already very excited. After she finished testing the restrictions yin, yang, and 5 elements, Tiange put away the compass, took out the 8 trigrams diagram from her sleeve, and threw it towards the entrance of the cave. The 8 trigrams diagram stopped in the middle of the restriction, then slowly unfolded, creating ripples of light that smoothed out the spiritual aura in the surroundings. Once the spiritual aura calmed down, Tiange stretched out her hand, and the 8 trigrams diagram flew back into her sleeve. Now that she examined the restriction again, she could see it much more clearly than before. The yin, yang, and 5 elements were no longer fluctuating, so it was much easier to distinguish whether it was the art of mechanisms or not. "It's strange. I feel like there's a spiritual aura fluctuation similar to that of a cultivator, but there's no puppets or anything else." The reason why the art of mechanisms was hard to distinguish was because it might only be a few simple mechanisms that weren't made to look like humans or beasts. In addition, Tiange's knowledge of this technique was limited, so she couldn't tell whether this was an art of mechanisms or a restriction that far surpassed her realm. Seeing her hesitate for a long time, she said, "Let me try." Right after he finished speaking, he took a step forward, put his hand into his Qiankuan bag, and took out the mountain-determining lantern. The mountain-determining lantern looked unremarkable. It had an old green color, a dark gray texture, and a simple design. It looked like a simple green lamp that had been burned in front of a Buddha statue in the secular world for dozens of years. It was gray, but if one looked carefully, one would notice that there were fine lines engraved inside the lantern, forming a wonderful formation that faintly emitted pure spiritual aura. The mountain-determining lantern flew up. As soon as it touched the restriction, it emitted light. At first, it was just a small green lamp, but gradually, the mountain-determining lantern became brighter and brighter. Xianxia could see that these two forces were contending against each other. Xianxia's peak-setting lantern was also a rare magic weapon. Magic weapons that could break restrictions were rare to begin with. Besides, this was a spiritual treasure he found in a secret place, so it was a top-grade magic weapon. Therefore, although he wasn't proficient in formations, with this lantern, ordinary restrictions couldn't stop him at all. The peak transcendent lantern shone brightly. The spiritual chi in the seal began to tremble as if it would be repelled in the next moment. Suddenly, there was a buzzing sound. The spiritual chi surged and formed a light screen, blocking the peak transcendent lantern. Upon seeing this, Xianxia formed an incantation gesture. The peak-determining lantern suddenly spun, driving the spiritual aura in the surroundings to form a vortex that collided with the light screen. Chi! A sharp tearing sound was heard. The light screen shook a little, and several ripples appeared on it. Seeing this, the two of them looked delighted. Xianxia directed the mountain-determining lantern to crash into the light screen even more attentively. After several collisions, a loud boom was heard. Under the impact of the peak transcendent lantern, the light screen suddenly broke. The light screen flickered, then disappeared in a flash. It's done! Xianxia was about to step forward when she suddenly felt a spiritual aura fluctuation. She instinctively sensed danger, so she took a step back. Muffled sounds of friction were heard at the same time. Two huge stone balls flew out from both sides of the Immortal's cave and attacked the peak transcendent lantern. Xianxia was startled. He formed an incantation gesture and the peak transcendent lantern immediately flew back. It brushed past the two stone balls and fell into his hand. With a loud boom, the two stone balls collided. Stone fragments flew everywhere, causing the spiritual aura in the surroundings to fluctuate continuously. A wave of chi rolled towards the two of them. This wave of chi was also a spiritual aura attack. Xianxia waved his sleeve and the sword aura of the three young real fire sword formed a formation, repelling the wave of chi. When the wave of chi dissipated, there was still a light screen in front of the Immortal's cave. Xianxia and Xianxia stood in front of the Immortal's cave, looking at each other in dismay. After a long time, Xianxia finally muttered to herself, "The art of mechanisms. It's really the art of mechanisms." The two stone balls weren't made of ordinary stones. They were a rare stone called broken jade stone, which was extremely hard. In today's world, even if it was only the size of a fist, it was still a refining material that cultivators would crazily fight over at trade fairs. However, in this ancient cultivator's Immortal's cave, this broken jade stone was actually made into such huge stone balls. It was really a waste of natural resources. Xianxia exhaled and put away the peak transcendent lantern. He said, "This is the first time I've seen this kind of restriction. We've obviously succeeded in breaking the restriction, but there's still a backup plan." Xianxia frowned and said, "This restriction has two layers. The outer layer is a formation restriction based on yin, yang, and 5 elements. Once this layer is broken, the art of mechanisms behind it will be activated and repel the enemy. After that, the restriction will repair itself." At this point, she patted her head. "This is going to be difficult. I don't have the slightest clue as to how to break the restriction." One day, they only had one day. If they couldn't get the storehouse command tablet in one day, the treasures in the storehouse would have nothing to do with them anymore. If they didn't have the confidence to break the restriction in this period of time, they might as well go to the Elder's Immortal's cave and compete with others. Xianxia turned to Xianxia in distress. "What should we do? Should we try our best here or give up and go to another Immortal's cave?" Xianxia deliberated for a while. Just as he was about to speak, his eyes suddenly lit up. "Look, this restriction." Xianxia once again looked towards the entrance of the Immortal's cave. She was pleasantly surprised. This. Just now, the restriction seemed to have been restored, but that wasn't the case. In just a short while, the light curtain had weakened a lot. Alright. Mo Tiange suddenly understood. Self-restoring restrictions usually repair themselves slowly over a long period of time. It's impossible for them to restore all their power in an instant. In fact, the outer layer of the restriction was already broken by the peak transcendent lantern. The one that was restored later was just to fool us. As she spoke, she once again took out her compass. Right now, this restriction hasn't recovered much of its power, so it won't be difficult to break it. As for this mechanism technique, it doesn't seem to be very powerful. Seeing that she was once again focused on breaking the formation, she smiled and sat cross-legged on the side, regulating his breath and keeping his guard up. The peak transcendent lantern had broken the first restriction, but its subsequent restoration couldn't be considered very powerful. At the very least, it hadn't broken through to the nascent soul realm. Mo Tiange pondered for a long time, then took out a bunch of formation-breaking tools from her bosom. Several formation flags formed a formation diagram at the entrance of the Immortal's cave. When the last formation flag was inserted, Mo Tiange made a hand seal. The formation flags suddenly lit up and eventually formed a light ball. Soon after, she let out a soft shout. The light ball flew up and hit the light curtain. Swish! This time, there wasn't even a stalemate. The light curtain was broken without a sound. After waiting for a while, the subsequent mechanism technique didn't activate and the restriction wasn't restored immediately. Mo Tiange heaved a sigh of relief. The first layer can be considered broken. She had already stopped regulating his breath when she started breaking the restriction. At this moment he asked, "What about the next mechanism? Do you have any ideas?" Mo Tiange pondered for a moment, then said, "I don't know much about the mechanism technique, so I can only use the stupid method." She took out the 2 stone sculpture dolls from her Qianquan bag and used her divine sense to control them, then walked towards the Immortal's cave. These 2 dolls were given to her by Wanderzue. They were also made using the mechanism technique, but their realms were a bit low. All these years, they'd been handling the miscellaneous matters in the Immortal's cave for her. The advantage of using these 2 dolls was that they were incomparably sturdy and had no consciousness. Even if they were broken, she could still repair them when she learned the mechanism technique in the future. If she used other living creatures to test them, for example, those 3 spiritual beasts, she reckoned they wouldn't be able to return. The 2 dolls walked step by step into the restriction. When they touched the spot where the stone ball rolled out, a faint cracking sound was heard. Suddenly, 2 shiny wooden hands emerged from the stone walls on both sides of the Immortal's cave and grabbed the 2 dolls. Just as Mo Tiange was about to make the dolls dodge, she discovered that the 2 hands moved extremely fast and grabbed the dolls' necks in an instant. The 2 dolls immediately brandished the stone swords in their hands, wanting to chop off the arms. However, with a clang, the stone swords chopped into the 2 arms and broke into 2 pieces. This time, she couldn't sit still anymore. These 2 hands seemed to be made of wood, but they were actually even harder than the dolls' stone swords. He knew that although these 2 dolls were only in the foundation building realm, the materials they were made of were extraordinary. Even ordinary magic weapons would have a hard time injuring them. Mo Tiange was stunned for a moment. She watched as the 2 hands exerted force and the stone sculpture dolls broke into 2 pieces, separating their heads from their bodies. After the 2 dolls were severed, the 2 hands retracted back into the stone walls and disappeared without a trace. After a while, Mo Tiange finally regained her senses. She sighed and used her spiritual aura to roll the 2 corpses into her Qianquan bag. She didn't expect that these 2 dolls, who'd been with her for so long, would be so easily destroyed. "Don't be stupid." At that moment, Fu Yaozi's voice rang in her mind. The so-called mechanism technique is used to make dolls and instruments that have the same cultivation level as cultivators. Furthermore, the higher the level, the rarer the materials used. Those 2 dolls of yours are only in the foundation building realm. Isn't it ridiculous to use them to test them? Mo Tiange was stunned for a moment before she started to understand. In the past, she relied on the fact that the 2 dolls were made of special materials and were difficult to damage, so she often used them to test formations. However, she forgot that formations only had spiritual aura fluctuations caused by yin, yang, and 5 elements. Mechanisms, on the other hand, had physical bodies like dolls. Master? She felt very ashamed. Then in your opinion, how should I break these mechanisms? Fu Yaozi chuckled. Have you forgotten that one strong man can defeat 10 skillful men? Mo Tiange was stunned for a moment before she suddenly understood. Thank you for your guidance, Master. In the past few days, she'd been either breaking restrictions or dealing with other people. She'd been using her brain too much. In the cultivation world, what did they rely on to win? Strength, of course. In front of absolute strength, any kind of skill was useless. Whether it was the stone balls at the beginning or the wooden hands later, their strength didn't surpass the nascent soul realm. That being the case, she could just directly break through them. Why would she need to use her brain? Thinking up to this point, she turned to Qin Shi and said with a smile, Senior Martial Brother, it's up to you. Chapter 473. The 3 Yang real fire sword transformed into sword auras and formed a formation, emitting a powerful aura. Qin Shi refined this sword when he first formed his gold core and kept it in his dantian for nearly 200 years. He also often refined it with precious materials, so its power was extraordinary. Hundreds of streaks of sword qi swept towards the stone door with an astonishing aura. With a loud boom, the 2 stone balls on the stone walls on both sides of the cave once again rolled out, but they were struck down by the sword auras one after another. Seeing this scene, Mo Tiange secretly sighed in relief. Fortunately, this mechanism wasn't too advanced. With Qin Shi's strength, breaking it was only a matter of time. After the stone balls, there was a wooden hand. It was unknown what this wooden hand was made of, but even Qin Shi's sword aura couldn't cut it. In the end, he had to use the extreme Yang real fire to break it. This went on for about 2 hours. In the end, Qin Shi once again brandished his sword aura. Finally, without any obstruction, it hit the stone door of the Immortal's cave. With a boom, the stone door opened, revealing its true appearance. The 2 of them looked at each other with joy. After tossing and turning here for several hours, they finally didn't waste their time and energy in vain. I'll go in first. Qin Shi turned around and said. With a wave of his sleeve, the sword aura returned to his side and formed a formation. Then, he carefully stepped into the cave. Mo Tiange watched nervously. Since this cave dwelling could only be used by high-grade cultivators of the sect, it was possible that there were existences that far surpassed their cultivation levels. For example, if the restrictions outside the cave dwelling were to be activated again, it would be more than enough to deal with. Fortunately, nothing happened after Qin Shi went in and looked around. He said to her, I'm fine. Come in. Mo Tiange breathed a sigh of relief, but she still didn't dare to relax. She operated the art of primordial origin and used the white silk handkerchief to protect herself before stepping inside. After entering the cave, she turned around and looked around. This cave was simple but not lacking in atmosphere. The hall was spacious, and there were only a few stone tables and chairs for receiving guests. There were also moonstones embedded in the walls, but they had long lost their effectiveness. There was a smaller stone door around it, which should lead to a cultivation room. This Immortal's cave is temporarily rented by their high-level cultivators, and it's also inside the sect, so there shouldn't be too many restrictions, Mo Tiange said after looking at it for a while. Qin Shi nodded. If this was a high-level cultivator's private Immortal's cave, it would definitely be heavily protected, but this was a public Immortal's cave, so the situation was different. Who would bother to set up layers of restrictions in a temporarily rented cave abode? Furthermore, it was in an important area of the sect. Normally, they would just set up their own array formation. The furnishings in the hall could be seen at a glance, and there was nothing else. The 2 turned their attention to the training room. They weren't sure if there were any high-level cultivators cultivating in the cave abode. If there weren't any in the cultivation room, then the few hours they spent here would have been in vain. I'll do it. Qin Shi was still in the lead. Under normal circumstances, cultivators would lay down a defensive array outside the cave abode, and then lay down a restriction around the cultivation room, just in case. If Gu Xiuxiu was really in seclusion in the cultivation room when the spirit mountain was torn apart, then he would most likely have set up a restriction. Mo Tiange knew she wasn't strong enough, so she didn't object and followed behind him. Several sword auras were shot out, and the stone door of the cultivation room was instantly smashed into pieces. In the middle of the red light, several white lights flashed and attacked outside with a powerful momentum. Xianxia was shocked. He raised his hand, and a white light shield appeared in front of him. At the same time, he dodged the white lights. TSS TSS TSS. Multiple black arrows struck the opposite stone wall, almost shattering it into pieces. Mo Tiange's face turned pale. When she turned around and saw that Xianxia had dodged safely, she calmed down a little. Is this also a mechanism technique? Xianxia withdrew his sword aura and turned around to ask. Most likely. Mo Tiange walked to the stone wall that was almost pierced through, picked up a black arrow, and looked at it for a while. Then she was pleasantly surprised. Black gold. Black gold. Xianxia also walked over, took the black arrow, and weighed it in his hand. Extreme young real fire sprang out of his palm and burned it for a while, but the black arrow didn't change at all. He said happily, "Sure enough, it's black gold. It's the best material for forging swords." When it came to refining tools, he was much more proficient than Mo Tiange, so he didn't need to explain how to distinguish black gold. The broken jade outside, the two wooden hands, and this black gold. Even if we didn't find the identity tablet, this trip was still worthwhile, Xianxia said with a smile. Mo Tiange nodded. Not to mention the wooden hands, they couldn't even tell what kind of material they were. The broken jade and black gold were both from the distant past era, and they were almost impossible to find in the current cultivation world. They only occasionally appeared in high-level cultivators' trade fairs, and usually only a small piece of them would be crazily snatched. However, since there are restrictions here, it's very likely that there are cultivators in closed-door meditation here. She put away the black arrows one by one and returned to the door of the cultivation room. Fortunately, this mechanism technique isn't complete. It's the only test. Before she stepped into the cultivation room, Xianxia stopped her and said, "I'll go in first." Mo Tiange hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she nodded and stepped back. In the face of possible dangers, Xianxia always paved the way for her, so she was moved. However, she hadn't formed her nascent soul yet, so it was a fact that she was weaker than him. Rather than trying to be brave, she'd better be obedient. Seeing that she was obedient, Xianxia showed a reassuring smile, activated the sword formation, and walked towards the cultivation room. When he stepped into the cultivation room's stone door, he paused for a moment, but there was no movement. He looked around and was instantly shocked. Mo Tiange didn't see any restrictions or mechanisms, so when she heard his voice, she followed him inside. What? She was just about to ask what was going on, but she was also stunned. This cultivation room's layout was also simple. There was only a stone bed, and a skeleton wearing a white robe was sitting cross-legged on it. The strange thing was that the skeleton's bones were neither black nor white. They were as transparent as crystal. What's going on? She stared at the skeleton in a daze. After a cultivator passed away, their physical body would turn into spiritual aura and dissipate, and their bones would gradually turn black with time until they turned into a pile of black ash. But not only was this skeleton preserved for tens of thousands of years intact, but it was also as transparent as crystal, which was simply unheard of. Xianxia cautiously approached it, turned the three-yang real fire sword into its original form, and poked the white robe covering it with the sword. The skeleton fell down with a single poke. With a crashing sound, it instantly collapsed into a pile of bones of various sizes. Seeing this, Xianxia withdrew the three-yang real fire sword, feeling puzzled. This white robe was obviously a rare spiritual treasure. It was still well preserved after tens of thousands of years, and its surface was smooth without the slightest wrinkle. Moreover, the body of the three-yang real fire sword was covered in real fire, but it didn't affect it in the slightest. Presumably, this skeleton was an elder-level figure of this distant past cultivation group, so it wasn't strange for it to have such a spiritual treasure. Tiange thought for a moment, then took out a pair of gloves made of natural worm silk from her Qinkuan bag and walked forward. "Be careful," Xianxia warned her. "This skeleton is so abnormal, I don't know if I can touch it." "Don't worry." Tiange waved her hand. "These gloves aren't even afraid of primordial devil aura, so they should be fine." After Nie Wushang swallowed primordial devil, she wore these gloves and came into contact with them, so they wouldn't corrode. Tiange picked up a bone and examined it carefully. This bone was obviously no longer made of bone, but it wasn't made of gold or jade, and of course, it wasn't made of real crystal either. It was extremely strange. She knocked it, and the bone made a crisp sound. She then tried to break it, but it didn't change in the slightest. The two of them couldn't figure out what was going on, so Tiange couldn't help but ask Fu Yaozi, "Master, have you ever heard that after a cultivator dies, their bones will become as transparent as crystal?" After a while, Fu Yaozi finally said, "What? Crystal-like bones? Master, you don't know? What were you doing just now?" Tiange was surprised. This master had always been paying attention to the surrounding situation, so why didn't he know what was happening outside this time? Fu Yaozi paused for a moment, then said, "Master's divine sense is a bit weak, so I was just resting." Tiange was shocked to hear this. "Master, at most, I'll be able to hold on for a month or so before my divine sense dissipates," Fu Yaozi said faintly. "All right, let me see what's going on." Tiange felt the Fusheng sword's divine sense flowing out and circling around the crystal bone. After a long time, it finally withdrew. From what I can see, the reason why this person's bones are abnormal after he died should be because he cultivated a kind of strange cultivation technique. Cultivation technique? Correct, Fu Yaozi said. "Look around and see if there are any storage-type magic weapons in the surroundings." Tiange swept her gaze around and saw a simple and unadorned silver ring on the skeleton's hand. She put the bone down and took off the silver ring. "An Qiankuan ring?" She looked happy to see this item. Legend has it that Qiankuan rings were storage-type magic weapons used by ancient cultivators and were much more advanced than Qiankuan bags. Unfortunately, the method of refining them has long been lost. I didn't expect to see the real thing today. The method used to refine Qiankuan rings is the space-tearing technique, so they're also called Shumi rings. How can Qiankuan bags compare to them? Fu Yaozi said after hearing Xi's words. Unfortunately, She couldn't hear him. Tiange tried to pour her spiritual aura into the Qiankuan ring and easily opened it. A pile of things came out with a clattering sound. "Don't." Fu Yaozi stopped her too late. The things were already piled up, so Tiange hastily cut off her spiritual aura and closed the Qiankuan ring. Fu Yaozi sighed. Think about it. Which high-level cultivator doesn't carry several Qiankuan bags with them? If all the things in these Qiankuan bags were put into Qiankuan rings, how many would there be? If you pour them out like this, I'm afraid you'll fill the whole room. Tiange scratched her head. She knew she did something stupid again. Wasn't Xianxia here? Of course she wanted to pour them out and look at them together. But you guys really made a profit. Since this skeleton is an elder-level figure of this big ancient cultivation group, he's at least in the deification realm. You guys really became rich overnight after obtaining his Qiankuan ring. Fu Yaozi was both envious and jealous. Master also saw an Qiankuan ring back then, but it was divided among 5 people. Tiange smiled and said, although Master only got 1/5 of it, he entered the deification realm in one go. Why are you still jealous of us? Fu Yaozi snorted and didn't say anything. Looking at the pile of things on the ground, Tiange pulled Xianxia and said, Senior Martial Brother, quickly look around and see if there are any identity tablets. Chapter 474. The two of them buried their heads and searched for a while. Sure enough, they found 3 pitch-black tokens. The tokens were made of neither gold nor wood, and there were faint, strange restrictions on them. "This is it," Fu Yaozi said. "You're lucky to find 3 of them at once." Mo Tiange didn't expect things to go so smoothly. They found tokens in their first cave, and there were 3 of them at that. She said happily, "Thank you for your guidance, master." Fu Yaozi didn't say anything. Maybe he was even more jealous. When he and the other 4 people entered the Immortal Palace, they went through a lot of trouble to get 1 token. They were lucky to get the treasures of an ancient cultivator without any harm. After putting away the tokens, the 2 of them roughly counted the items in the universe ring. The ancient cultivator who turned into a crystal skeleton was indeed a deification cultivator. There were many treasures beyond the nascent soul realm in the interspatial ring. Unfortunately, too much time had passed, so the spiritual herbs and medicinal pills had long lost their medicinal properties. Fortunately, the interspatial ring was independent and the spiritual aura was stagnant, so most of the refining materials and magic weapons were intact. These are all high-grade spirit stones. She picked up a spirit stone bag. Ancient cultivators were really rich. There are at least tens of thousands of high-grade spirit stones here. The whole Immortal Palace is made of high-grade spirit stones. Presumably, high-grade spirit stones weren't rare in the Middle Ages. She nodded in agreement. The next moment, he said in surprise, "Tiange, look." Mo Tiange turned around to take a look. She was also shocked. This is... In Qi's hand lay several colorful, sparkling and translucent jades. Each piece was surrounded by spiritual aura visible to the naked eye and reflected rainbow-like colors. After looking for a while, she cried out involuntarily, "Are these crystal jades?" The appearance of these jades was very similar to the crystal soul jades she exchanged for in Kuanzhong City, but their quality was better. Each one was bright and sparkling without the slightest flaw. Crystal jades were a kind of jade that could store spirit stones in the Middle Ages. Genuine ones were called crystal jades, substandard ones were called crystal stones, and defective ones were called crystal soul jades. Compared with spirit stones, crystal jades not only contained a lot of spiritual aura, but their spiritual aura could also be slowly replenished after it was consumed. After the upheaval, crystal jades had almost disappeared. Even crystal soul jades could only be found by chance. Nowadays, if a cultivator obtained a crystal soul jade, they would usually embed it into a magic treasure. That way, the magic treasure could automatically recover spiritual energy. Although it was slow, in a battle of magical powers, a little more spiritual energy could affect the outcome of the battle. The quality of the crystal jades in front of them was so good that their effects would definitely be 100 times better than the crystal soul jades. In the current world of cultivators, each of them would fetch a sky-high price. Most likely. She poured out all the crystal jades he had. There were actually several hundred of them. Even though he had seen so many treasures, he still found it hard to breathe. After calming himself down, he said with a smile, "Although the resources of the ancient times are slightly inferior to those of the immemorial times, they still can't be underestimated. Their high-grade spirit stones can be used to build immortal palaces. I presume that the high-grade cultivators used crystal jades to trade." Mo Tiange pressed her hand on her chest to calm her breathing. She beamed with joy and said, "Master Fu Yaozi was right. We really got rich overnight." After seeing so many crystal jades, the 2 of them were prepared to look at the other treasures, so they were no longer shocked. Soon after, the 2 of them found a jade slip among the miscellaneous items. The jade slip recorded a cultivation technique called Ice Heart Jade Bone Technique. Fu Yaozi guessed correctly. The bones of these ancient cultivators were crystal-like because of the Ice Heart Jade Bone Technique. This cultivation technique could only be practiced by cultivators with ice spiritual roots. It was the cultivation technique of the Ice Heart Jade Bone Technique, and only a few outstanding geniuses could practice it. After practicing this cultivation technique, the bones in the whole body would slowly change. By the time a cultivator reached the nascent soul realm, their bones would be as clear as crystal. At that time, the Ice Heart Jade Bone Technique could be considered to have reached the initial stage and could increase one's chances of advancing to the deification realm. The 2 of them felt it was a pity. They didn't have ice spiritual roots, so they couldn't use this miraculous cultivation technique. In addition, there was also a jade slip related to the art of mechanisms. It was called Introduction to Mechanisms. Mo Tiange looked at it and was slightly disappointed. The art of mechanisms recorded in this jade slip was very simple. It seemed this ancient cultivator had just started studying the art of mechanisms and wasn't proficient in it. It was no wonder the mechanisms arranged in this cave weren't too brilliant. They were only made of rare materials and had great lethality. Once they finished looking, the two of them put everything back into their interspatial rings, including the white robe covering the corpse. As for the crystal bones, Fu Yaozi also told them to put them away. Mo Tiange hesitated. These bones were so special, so they must be useful. But they already took the remains of this ancient cultivator. If they didn't even let go of his remains, wouldn't that be a bit? As if he knew what she was thinking, Fu Yaozi said faintly, "It's just a bag of skin. What's there to care about? This ancient cultivator senior has already passed away. These bones have long had nothing to do with him." Mo Tiange knew she was sticking to the surface. She took a deep breath, excused herself, put the crystal bones into her bag, and also put them into her interspatial ring. After finishing these things and making sure she didn't miss anything, she left the cave with Qin Shi. After leaving this cave, the two of them went to the second cave without stopping. This time, it was much simpler. This cave didn't have any art of mechanisms and only had some residual restrictions. It only took the two of them an hour to break the restrictions at the entrance. After entering the cave, they found that the furnishings inside were the same as before. There was nothing but a stone table and a stone chair. After Qin Shi broke the cultivation room, he didn't find any traces of restrictions. It was empty, no one was in closed-door meditation. Although the two of them were mentally prepared, they were still disappointed. Then they went to the third and last cave. "Something's wrong," Qin Shi said with a frown before breaking the restriction. "What's wrong?" Mo Tiange was laying formation flags, preparing to break the restriction. "There's a strange aura inside," Qin Shi said. "Be careful." Mo Tiange nodded. There was a gap in their realms. Qin Shi's divine sense was stronger than hers, so he was more sensitive to danger than her. After pondering for a moment, she arranged another restriction around the formation flag used to break the formation. The restriction-breaking formation was activated, and the light screen in front of the cave flashed. Qin Shi stepped forward, gathered his sword aura, and hit the stone door. With a loud bang, the stone door was smashed into pieces, and a gust of black aura gushed out. "Be careful!" Qin Shi pulled Mo Tiange and quickly retreated. "Primordial devil aura." Mo Tiange gasped. Without thinking, she reached into her sleeve and took out the Lotus Elemental umbrella. Fortunately, she had set up an additional restriction earlier. The primordial devil chi was blocked, and not much of it leaked out. At this moment, the Lotus Dragon umbrella was opened, and the fluorescent light sprinkled down, isolating the remaining devil chi outside. "Sword formation!" she shouted, remembering what Fu Yaozi once told her. Qin Shi reacted very quickly. In an instant, he retrieved the 3-yang real fire sword into his body, dispersed the spiritual aura protecting his body, and used the art of rising and falling devil. Aside from the Lotus Elemental umbrella, Mo Tiange also put away all her magic weapons. The two of them retreated for a long time before they breathed a sigh of relief. "What's going on?" Mo Tiange asked in bewilderment as they glanced at each other. "Maybe this cave is the point where the primordial devil aura leaked out," Qin Shi guessed. There was no other explanation. Mo Tiange hesitated. "Then, do we still go in?" The primordial devil aura in this space was purer and more powerful than anything they had ever encountered. Moreover, it could backfire, so it was really difficult to deal with. Qin Shi glanced at her and asked, "What do you think?" Mo Tiange was about to say something, but the two of them suddenly felt a dangerous aura and vigilantly looked towards the entrance of the cave. They saw that the primordial devil aura at the open stone door was getting thicker and thicker, and a powerful momentum was pressing down on them, almost making it hard for them to breathe. "Deification stage," Qin Shi muttered. He was already in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. He was sure that nascent soul cultivators couldn't have this kind of momentum, not even late-stage nascent soul cultivators who were only a step away from the deification stage. Let's go. He made a prompt decision and suddenly grabbed Imo Tiange's hand. With a wave of his sleeve, he summoned his flying cloud and directly jumped down from the hardship cliff. When the two of them jumped down from the hardship cliff, Imo Tiange glanced at the entrance of the cave. From the corner of her eye, a completely charred and swaying refined corpse appeared. This refined corpse stopped at the entrance of the cave for a moment. With a wave of its hand, its sharp claws destroyed the formation she laid at the entrance. Soon after, it seemed to sense their aura and look towards them. Imo Tiange was shocked. She roughly guessed what was going on. In this third cave, there was also a deification cultivator who was cultivating in closed-door meditation. When the space was torn, all the cultivators were killed, and this cultivator also died at this time. Later, there was a problem with the sacrificial temple under the Immortal Palace. Primordial devil aura leaked out, and this cave happened to be one of the points where the aura leaked out. There were restrictions both inside and outside the cave, so the primordial devil aura was sealed inside. As time passed, this cultivator skeleton was corroded and turned into a refined corpse. The refined corpse had no consciousness, and the cave was in a closed state. For a long time, this deification refined corpse just stayed in the cave, completely unaware of the changes outside. If they hadn't opened the cave, perhaps it would have remained silent like this, no different from a corpse. But today they opened the cave, and it sensed the aura of living people. Thus, it finally stepped out of this cave and walked towards the world it was once familiar with. It fell from the top of the hardship cliff at an extremely fast speed. Just as it was about to hit the ground, the flying cloud suddenly stopped, changed direction, and fled into the distance at an extremely fast speed. The deification refined corpse also jumped down from the hardship cliff, but with a rumble, it fell heavily to the bottom of the cliff. The devil aura around its body surged because of this jump. After a while, it finally condensed again. It stood up shakily and chased after them. "It's behind us." Imo Tiange turned around to look. In this immortal palace, they couldn't use their divine sense freely, so they could only barely sense the powerful aura following behind them. Qin Shi's expression was solemn. He said calmly, "The refined corpse's speed is a weakness. If it's fast enough, we can escape." Then, with a clear sound, he spread out the sword formation again and circled around them. At the same time, he didn't hesitate to slap precious talismans on the two of them. Although there might be strange restrictions in this immortal palace because of the space being torn, they couldn't fly too fast, but they couldn't care less. A deification refined corpse, even if all the cultivators who entered the immortal palace joined forces, could be destroyed with a wave of their hand. They weren't its match at all. They had no other choice but to escape. Chapter 475. The fiery red flight light swept past the foot of the mountain, rushing toward the buildings of the Immortal Palace. On a lonely peak, Progenitor Miaoying suddenly turned her head and looked at the flight light in surprise. Who is this fellow Daoist? How dare he fly in the Immortal Palace like this? Isn't he afraid of triggering some strange restriction? Traveling with her was a skinny old man in a tattered Daoist robe. He was Daoist Guer of Pufa school. Jingshu sect and Pufa sect could only be regarded as average among the major forces. Except for the two grand supreme elders at the late nascent stage, the strength of the other nascent soul cultivators was average. When they entered the Immortal Palace, the other cultivators of the two sects were left outside, and only the two of them temporarily accompanied each other. Daoist Gu stroked his goatee. When he saw the black demonic aura behind the red flight light, he exclaimed, "Junior Martial Sister Miaoying, look!" A demonic creature. The two of them looked at each other with strange expressions. Judging from the scene in front of them, the cultivator in the red flight light must be being chased by the demonic aura. The question was, what exactly was this demonic aura? The two of them had a smooth journey, but they hadn't seen any refined corpses. It didn't take long for them to find the answer. The red flight light flew so fast that the demonic aura gradually couldn't keep up. However, it sensed their breaths halfway, paused, then changed direction and flew toward them. Seeing this, progenitor Miaoying was shocked. Senior Marshal Brother Guo, look. The next moment, the surging breath almost soared into the sky. Daoist Guo's expression became even more unsightly. He flicked his horsetail whisk, a cloud appeared under his feet, and he was about to escape while shouting, "Run! It's a deification cultivator!" But progenitor Miaoying looked at the half-broken ancient cultivator's cave with pity. If they could break this cave, they'd definitely get amazing fated chances. But she wasn't stupid. Sensing the demonic aura, she clenched her teeth, turned into a flight light, and chased after Daoist Guo. All fated chances were not as important as her life. She flew out of the ascetic cliff, flew past the peaks full of spiritual aura, and entered the building complex of the Immortal Palace. He didn't feel any aura anymore, so he stopped. He temporarily put away the flying cloud and landed in a garden. It didn't chase us? Still in a state of shock, Emotienga turned around to look. However, her divine sense was restricted in this place, so how far could she see with her eyes? Naturally, he didn't see anything. She wiped the sweat off his face and said, "He went to chase after someone else. Let's take a break first." When he was fleeing just now, he didn't hold back at all. He even used his blood essence to destroy his true essence. He flew without any scruples. When he encountered a restriction, he could only forcefully dissolve it. Now, he didn't have much spiritual chi left. Chasing after someone else? Emotienga was dumbfounded for a moment. Her cultivation level was slightly lower, so her divine sense was more restricted. On the way here, she didn't notice anyone else at all. She swallowed a handful of restorative panaceas and said, "I sensed there were people in front of me, so I deliberately flew past them." Sure enough, that refined corpse couldn't distinguish between us and chased after those two people. Emotienga glanced at him but didn't say anything. Upon seeing her expression, she smiled. "What do you want to say?" Emotienga wrinkled her brows, but she couldn't help but laugh. "I really didn't know you could be so treacherous." She wore a smile on his face, but his gaze was indifferent. He didn't take it seriously. "Isn't this very normal? We can only escape by diverting the trouble to someone else. I'm not a saint either." Emotienga nodded. She didn't feel conflicted in her heart. If she were in his shoes, she might also make the same choice. "All right, don't waste time. Let's quickly recover our spiritual aura," she said, then sat cross-legged on the spot to adjust his breath. Emotienga had been carried all the way here, so she didn't consume much spiritual aura. However, in this kind of situation, the more prepared, the better. Thus, she also sat cross-legged, adjusting her breath while thinking about countermeasures. A deification realm refined corpse appeared in this immortal palace. For the cultivators who entered the Immortal Palace, the treasure-seeking journey immediately became perilous. The higher the realm, the greater the gap between the two realms. The difference between the deification realm and the nascent soul realm was like heaven and earth, even between the early stage of the deification realm and the peak stage of the nascent soul realm. This deification realm refined corpse was naturally transformed by chance. Although it didn't have a consciousness, it was very likely that it retained its original body's habits in fights of magical powers. How could the divine abilities of the deification realm cultivators of the distant past era, who had already declined for more than 100,000 years, be a match for the cultivators of the cultivation world? Therefore, if they were caught by this deification realm refined corpse, no matter how powerful a nascent soul cultivator was, they could only die. However, since it was a refined corpse, its weakness was its clumsiness. If they discovered it early and avoided it, they wouldn't be in life-threatening danger. However, the problem was that with a deification realm refined corpse wandering around, the nascent soul cultivators wouldn't be at ease when searching for treasures. "Master?" Emotienga called Fu Yaozi softly after thinking for a while. However, Fu Yaozi didn't move for a long time. If she didn't feel the existence of the divine sense on the Fusheng sword, she would almost think he disappeared. Thinking about what Fu Yaozi said before, that his divine sense was a bit weak, Mo Tiange guessed that maybe he was resting? She couldn't help but sigh. That being the case, they could only think of a way themselves. She didn't really care about the other treasures in this immortal palace. Their original goal was to collect top-grade spiritual treasures in the storehouse. Now that there was a deification realm refined corpse wandering around in the immortal palace, there was no need to stay outside. There was an illusory formation in the storehouse. In the end, the refined corpse was just an idiot. It definitely couldn't see through the illusory formation. The storehouse was the safest place. But here came the problem. Although she knew the weakness of the illusory formation, she and Xianxia alone weren't enough to break it. When they left the storehouse, they agreed to meet up with Master Daoist Yuanmu and the others for a day. There was still half a day left. Did they have to hide for half a day? While Mo Tiange was pondering, the immortal palace was in a mess because of this deification realm refined corpse. Seeing Daoist Gua and primordial Lord Miaoying flying towards them at an unparalleled speed, Venerable Xuxiang's loud voice rang out. "Oh my, fellow Daoists, where are you going?" Venerable Xuxiang really didn't have many friends. After entering the immortal palace, no one was willing to cooperate with him, so he could only wander around the immortal palace alone, looking for fated chances. Fortunately, he found the remains of several ancient cultivators and obtained several Qiankuan bags. However, the cultivation levels of these ancient cultivators weren't very high. Although there were several rare treasures in their Qiankuan bags, none of them were related to the deification realm. He had been stuck in the late stage of the nascent soul realm for so many years, but aside from fated chances related to the deification realm, there really wasn't anything else that caught his eye. He also found an ancient cultivator's immortal's cave on a separate mountain peak that was obviously of a much higher level. Unfortunately, it was robbed by old man Yuanmu, who relied on his superior numbers. Although Yuanmu was noisy as a great cultivator in the late nascent soul realm, how could he be a fool? He was only one person and couldn't compete with Jiuyan's sect, so he could only endure it. However, since he didn't have any clear information or partners to cooperate with, he had no other choice but to rely on luck. Thus, he wandered around the immortal palace, hoping to find the medicinal garden of this great ancient cultivation group or a hidden ancient cultivator's cave to pick up one or two things related to the deification realm. As he wandered around, he suddenly saw two rays of light speeding towards him. There were a total of 11 late nascent soul realm cultivators in Yunzhong. These people were both competitors and fellow cultivators who appreciated each other. After hundreds and thousands of years, they were very familiar with each other. With just a glance, he knew that it was progenitor Miaoying and Daoist Gua. Seeing the two of them, Venerable Void Phase was delighted. Although these two were not too close to him, they were much better than old fogies like Yuanmu and Guifeng. Progenitor Miaoying was famous for her good relations with others. She was always smiling at everyone and had a good relationship with him. Daoist Gua was also a turtle and was a good guy. Surely he wouldn't have any objections if he were to join them? If he had these two as partners, he would be able to show off his skills. Besides, Daoist Gua cultivated the Vajra body enhancement technique, and progenitor Miao Ying's strength was not in attack. As for him, his tiger taming technique was known for its tyrannical power, which just happened to make up for their shortcomings. They should not have any objections. With this thought in mind, Venerable Void Phase called out to the two of them. Hey, I'm calling you. Why are you running so fast? It's not like I'm going to eat you." Taoist Void Phase, who are you addressing as Lord Buddha? Hearing this, the two fleeting lights stopped. Progenitor Miaoying glanced at Venerable Void Phase with a smile. Her usually dignified and amiable face now had a hint of murderous intent. Venerable Void Phase was annoyed that he had let slip. He smiled shamelessly and said, "Junior Sister Miaoying, this old monk has always been like this. I can't stop talking. I didn't mean to say that to you. Please don't take it to heart. If you didn't say that to Junior Sister Miaoying, then you must have said it to me?" Daoist Gua flicked his horsetail whisk and glanced at Venerable Void Phase with half-opened eyes. Venerable Void Phase blinked his large eyes and pretended to be innocent. Old man Gua, I just couldn't stop talking. You're not that petty, are you? Daoist Gua raised his eyes and ignored him. Although he was a good guy, he did not have a good temper with Venerable Void Phase. Venerable Void Phase had a favor to ask, so he could not be bothered to be calculative. He asked shamelessly, Junior Sister Miaoying, Old man Gua, what are you doing? Why are you in such a hurry? Did you find some opportunity? Progenitor Miaoying glanced at him with a half-smile. Fellow Daoist Void Phase, this opportunity. I don't think it's a good idea to tell others about it. Just say it. Venerable Void Phase was very anxious. He had been wandering around for more than a day and had yet to find any opportunity. Let's get straight to the point. Neither of you are good at attacking, so I can make up for your shortcomings. Bring me along. If there's an opportunity, I'm willing to let you choose first. Progenitor Miaoying and Daoist Gua looked at each other and seemed to be discussing something. Turning around, they saw Venerable Void Phase looking at them eagerly. Progenitor Miaoying smiled. Fellow Daoist Void Phase, it's not that we can't bring you along. But you said that if there's an opportunity, we'll choose first, right? Of course, of course. Venerable Void Phase nodded repeatedly. Very well. We've indeed found an opportunity not far ahead. Wait here. We'll send word for you once we've confirmed it. What do you think? You're not trying to fool me, are you? If you don't believe me, then forget it. Progenitor Miaoying pretended to leave. Wait. Venerable Void Phase quickly called out to them. All right, I believe you. Progenitor Miaoying revealed a dignified and friendly smile. Then please wait here, fellow Daoist Void Phase. Senior Brother Gua and I will send word soon. She glanced at Daoist Gua and the two of them turned into conveyance lights and flew away. Venerable Void Phase rubbed his bald head and shouted from behind, You'd better send word quickly. The two conveyance lights disappeared among the mountains without looking back. After a while, Venerable Void Phase's angry roar could be heard. Miaoying Old man Gua. You two bastards. How dare you plot against me? Chapter 476. When the ascetic cliff released the soul formation refined corpse, she deliberately led it to Miaoying Progenitor and Daoist Gua's vicinity. Miaoying Progenitor and Daoist Gua ran into Venerable Xianxia on the way and schemed that he would stay in the same place to attract the refined corpse's attention. Venerable Xianxia was so angry that he ran very fast and happened to run into Demon Lord Night Frost. Under such a cycle, the immortal palace of the great ancient sect, Ice Palace, was in chaos for a while. Almost everyone was caught up in it. The most miserable ones were the 3 early-stage nascent soul cultivators. Although they weren't weak, they relied on luck to enter the immortal palace. When they passed through the passage, they suffered serious injuries and were wandering in the immortal palace looking for spiritual treasures when they unfortunately ran into the soul formation refined corpse that was also wandering around. Whether it was divine sense, experience, or escape techniques, they were no match for those late-stage nascent soul cultivators. Caught off guard, they were killed by the refined corpse. Then, it was the 2 injured mid-stage nascent soul cultivators from the Juyan sect. Their reactions were quite fast, and they discovered it in time. However, in the process of escaping because they were too heavily injured, one of them was caught up too, while the other died after encountering a powerful movement restriction in the air. And then, in less than half a day, the entire immortal palace became a slaughterhouse. Cultivators who were slightly weaker were all killed except for those late-stage nascent soul cultivators and some lucky people. However, not all of these elemental late-stage cultivators managed to escape unscathed. The Moon Shadow Demon Lord was unlucky enough to lose a refined corpse, which was equivalent to losing an arm. As for the others, even if they weren't injured, their spiritual aura was greatly damaged by the pursuit. In order to resolve the restriction in their flight, they had to use some spiritual treasures and secret techniques. In the chaotic immortal palace, every cultivator who had encountered a soul formation stage refined corpse was cursing in their hearts. They had been in the immortal palace for more than a day, and they hadn't seen any soul formation stage refined corpse at all. They really didn't know which bastard had released this refined corpse and caused them so much trouble. At this time, Xianxia and Xianxia, the main culprits, had already recovered their spiritual aura. They cautiously walked in the direction of the storeroom. The refined corpse caused such a big commotion, so they naturally noticed it. However, this was exactly what they wanted. The refined corpses had already been released. It was best to drag everyone into this mess so that they could escape. Otherwise, if they were the only ones being chased by the refined corpses, wouldn't they be letting others take advantage of them? Xianxia, in particular, was rejoicing in his misfortune. During this trip to returning Ruin Sea, before Xianxia arrived, she had been bullied by these nascent soul cultivators. Now that they were in trouble, she wouldn't feel guilty at all. Another flight light flew past them at an extremely fast speed. Xianxia cautiously pulled Xianxia towards another direction to avoid it. During this half a day, they had seen this scene many times. There were often cultivators who disregarded the restrictions in the sky and madly ran for their lives in the Immortal Palace. It couldn't be helped. No matter how dangerous the restriction was, the chances of encountering it weren't high. If the refined corpse caught up to them, they would definitely be finished. Mid-stage nascent soul. Xianxia looked at that flight light and said, "This person's strength isn't bad, but he seems to be injured. He's in danger." Xianxia watched that flight light fly away, and the refined corpse followed closely behind it. Sure enough, that flight light swayed in the sky and stopped for a moment before the devil aura caught up to it. The devil aura rose and covered that flight light. They seemed to hear screams coming from inside, and then the devil aura slowly swallowed the flight light. This scene happened in the sky. Many cultivators in the Immortal Palace saw it and couldn't help but feel their hearts palpitate. The deification realm was an insurmountable gap for them. If it caught up to them, they would also be killed with a wave of their hands. They simply couldn't resist it. When that flight light completely disappeared, the devil aura stayed in the sky for a moment before chasing it in another direction. This time, it was a dazzling sword light that streaked across the sky, flying rapidly in their direction. Xianxia's expression changed slightly. He didn't have time to hide anymore. He pulled Xianxia, summoned his flying cloud, and randomly chose a direction to escape in. Unexpectedly, the owner of that sword light seemed to have seen them and also turned to chase in their direction. Upon realizing this, Xianxia frowned. This person did it on purpose. If they encountered a refined corpse, they would find another unlucky person. This was the tacit practice of the cultivators in the Immortal Palace for half a day. Some people succeeded, but some people became victims. The person behind them chased closely, and the refined corpse followed closely behind him. After flying for a while, Xianxia's expression darkened. He said, "This person's cultivation level is ordinary, but he's very fast. I'm afraid we can't get rid of him for a while." Xianxia turned around and said coldly, "This person is obviously relying on us. Even if we can't catch up after he's killed by the refined corpse will find us. This is really harming others without benefiting ourselves." Xianxia's eyes flashed fiercely. He said in a low voice, "If that's the case, I don't mind killing this person first before refining the corpse." Although this method couldn't solve the problem, anyone would be angry after being schemed against so obviously. Xianxia shut her mouth and remained silent. If he didn't carry her, Xianxia's speed should be a bit faster, but this person's spiritual aura is running out. Xianxia said happily as she turned her head again. While fleeing, Xianxia always paid attention to his back. As time passed, the person's speed slowed down. Obviously, he didn't have enough spiritual aura. Just as he was about to speed up, he suddenly heard a clear sound behind him. The flying sword under the person's feet burst out thousands of sword lights and suddenly sped up. Xianxia's footsteps paused for a moment before he suddenly turned his head to face that person. "Senior martial brother." Xianxia was shocked and didn't understand what he was doing. Since this person didn't have enough spiritual aura, even if he used a secret technique, He would be like an arrow at the end of its flight. As long as he sped up, he could get rid of him. Why did he go to face him? Xianxia didn't answer. Soon, he came face to face with the owner of the sword light. He raised his hand and threw a talisman. The talisman ignited in the wind and suddenly released a powerful spiritual aura. It slowly condensed into a human figure in the air and stopped behind the person. Once he finished doing this, Xianxia turned his flying cloud and once again flew away at high speed. That sword light paused for a moment, then followed closely behind him. The refined corpse quickly caught up. Sensing the spiritual aura transformed from the talisman, it seemed a bit confused. After hesitating for a while, it finally waved its hand to grab it. The refined corpse stopped for a moment to buy some time for the three people, then it quickly fled. When the refined corpse finished swallowing the spiritual aura transformed from the talisman, it happened to find another group of cultivators nearby, so it turned around and chased after them. The three people breathed a sigh of relief and fled for a distance before they found a safe place to land. "It's you!" Tiange was shocked to see this person after they landed in a desolate garden. This person wore a cyan robe and carried a sword. His face was thin and expressionless. He was Xianxia, the cyan-robed swordsman she met in Starfall City several decades ago. At that time, they both fell into Castellan May's trap and worked together. However, she was later chased by Castellan May and didn't know Xianxia's whereabouts. Tiange had very complicated feelings about Xianxia. This person was quick-witted and meticulous. He could quickly make decisions in dangerous situations. He was indeed a first-class person. However, he was selfish and attached great importance to benefits. In order to achieve his goals, he didn't care about other people's lives. He wasn't someone she could associate with. However, it was precisely this person who stopped her when she was about to be killed by Castellan May, allowing her to escape. She couldn't tell whether she hated him or was grateful to him. But what surprised her more was that when they met, Xianxia's cultivation level was clearly in the middle stage of the core formation realm, but now he was in the early stage of the nascent soul realm. In more than 50 years, from the middle stage of the core formation realm to the early stage of the nascent soul realm, this speed couldn't be considered slow. Moreover, this person was a sword cultivator. Before she could say anything, Xianxia suddenly smiled at her. This smile was a bit helpless, a bit emotional, but it also carried an indescribable sense of familiarity. Tiange was stunned. This person, when Xianxia heard her words, he frowned and looked at her with confusion. He then turned around and said to Xianxia, "Why are you here? Why can't I be here?" Xianxia's tone was also very helpless. He looked at them with a very complicated expression. "How did you recognize me?" Xianxia said coldly, "No matter what, we've known each other for more than 200 years. Others might not recognize your secret technique, but I do." Xianxia lowered his head. He seemed a bit depressed and didn't answer. Xianxia snorted coldly and said, "Harming others without benefiting yourself. Even if you die, you still want to find someone to be your scapegoat. Your character really won't change even if you die." Hearing this, Xianxia answered gloomily, "If I knew it was you guys, I wouldn't have chased after you." Xianxia snorted again and didn't say anything. Their conversation was like riddles, making Tiange feel confused. She looked at Xianxia, then looked at Xianxia. An absurd idea suddenly emerged in her mind, but the more she looked at Xianxia, the more real this idea became. "You're Xingxingji," she blurted out. Xianxia looked up at her and sighed gloomily. He reached out and wiped his face. Sure enough, it was Xingxingji's face with peach blossoms. "You only recognized me this time? You're really slow." He smiled. So he's Xingxingji. Tiange's heart was in turmoil, but her expression was calm. When she first met Xianxia, she just felt his temperament was a bit familiar, but she didn't think too much about it. After all, there were many selfish people like him in the cultivation world. Besides, this was Yunzhong. How could she have expected to meet an old friend in addition to Nie Wuxiang? But now that she thought about it, it wasn't surprising. She had long known Xingxingji's situation. Since he fell out with venerable swordsman Fuling's sect, he probably couldn't live in Gujian sect anymore, so it wasn't strange for him to run to Yunzhong. Although Yunzhong was very far from the celestial pole, she found an undersea passage. Nie Wuxiang safely crossed the South Sea, so Jing Xingji naturally could also find a way. Seeing Qin Shi's doubtful gaze, Mo Tiange explained simply, "When I was tricked by Mei Feng, he was also among them." Qin Shi nodded to show he understood. He asked about her experiences these years, so he only needed to hear one sentence to understand what was going on. Mo Tiange asked again, "Weren't you in the late stage of the core formation realm? Why were you in the middle stage of the core formation realm back then? And now you're advancing to the nascent soul realm?" Jing Xingji shrugged and answered, "Can't my cultivation level regress because of my injuries? As for advancing to the nascent soul realm, I'm a cultivator of the same generation as Qin Shoujing. He's already in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, so why can't I advance to the nascent soul realm?" After he answered, Mo Tiange didn't know what to say, and Qin Shi didn't say anything. For a while, the three of them fell into a strange silence. Chapter 477. Mo Tiange had long let go of Jing Xingji. Back then she was plotted against, and nothing happened between them. Now that she and Qin Shi were so happy, there was no need to care about the past. Besides, although Jing Xingji didn't have a good personality, he was quite affectionate toward Qin Shi. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but glance at Qin Shi then at Jing Xingji. Speaking of which, the relationship between them was also very strange. Qin Shi had a cold personality and didn't like to socialize, so other people always thought he was arrogant, cold, and distant. In fact, he treated people amiably and was polite when interacting with others. On the other hand, he kept a distance from almost everyone and had to be reserved in his speech and behavior. However, he never pretended to be polite to Jing Xingji, and he was often very direct. It seemed he didn't mind showing his true feelings in front of him. From this aspect, Mo Tiange almost thought Qin Shi regarded Jing Xingji as a friend, the kind of friend he could confide in. However, they didn't even have the most basic contact between friends. After coming out of Demonic Mountain, Qin Shi didn't mention Jing Xingji. Looking at Jing Xingji again, from Mo Tiange's point of view, this person was really not a person to be friends with. He almost never said a word of truth to others. When he met a woman, he would be very attentive, but deep down, he didn't take it seriously at all. He was extremely selfish and didn't care about other people's lives in order to achieve his goals. He even harmed others without benefiting himself. If he couldn't escape, he would drag others down with him. However, although he was extremely unreliable, he would stick to his own principles. Back then, under Master Songfeng's coercion, he was still unwilling to do that kind of thing. After that, he felt even more sorry for Qin Shi. Thinking of this, Mo Tiange felt that the relationship between them was simply intertwined with love and hate. I say, in the silence, hearing her voice, the other two people immediately looked at her. "What's the relationship between you two?" Upon hearing this question, Qin Shi just looked at her and didn't answer. Jing Xingji raised his eyebrows and said with a surprised smile, "What do you think?" Mo Tiange ignored him and looked at Qin Shi. Qin Shi still didn't answer and just shook his head gently. She didn't know whether he said it didn't matter or he didn't want to talk about it now. Then, he turned to Jing Xingji and asked the same question, "Why are you here? Did you disappear in the celestial pole all these years because you came to Yunzhong?" This time, Jing Xingji didn't answer, "Why can't I be here?" Instead, he sighed and answered seriously, "Why else? Don't you know? My days in Gujian sect weren't good. After that incident on Demonic Mountain, I had a falling out with them and simply didn't want to go back." Mo Tiange asked, "Fellow Daoist Jing, you were only in the core formation realm back then, so how did you come to Yunzhong? It can't be crossing the South Sea, right?" Jing Xingji glanced at her with a faint smile. "If you can reach Yunzhong safely, why can't I?" He paused for a moment before he answered seriously, "In the past, when I was adventuring, I happened to come across an ancient transporting formation. After I planned to leave the celestial pole, I spent some effort to repair it. Who would have thought that the destination of this ancient transportation formation was actually Yuan Province? After arriving at Yuan Province, I took a detour to Yunzhong. I saw that the cultivation level here was very high, so I simply stayed. What about you guys? Why did you come to Yunzhong? Don't tell me you also couldn't survive in Yunzhong? Since he spoke in such detail and didn't intend to hide anything, Mo Tiange also answered, I learned about an undersea passage through an ancient cultivator's cave, so I came to Yunzhong to gain experience. As for senior martial brother, he crossed the South Sea to come here. Jing Xingji raised his eyebrows, his gaze moving back and forth between the two of them. Why didn't you take the same path? Because the passage collapsed, Mo Tiange answered sullenly. In any case, it had already collapsed, so it wasn't a big deal to say it out loud. Jing Xingji didn't expect this kind of answer, so he was speechless for a moment. He looked at Mo Tiange, then looked at Qin Shi and suddenly said, You didn't cross the sea to look for her, did you? Qin Shi's expression was cold. What? Can't I? Jing Xingji raised his eyebrows in surprise. After a long time, he finally patted Qin Shi's shoulder and said, Qin Shoujing, we've known each other for more than 200 years. Although you've always been known as a genius and your cultivation level has always been higher than mine, I've never taken it seriously. But today, I'm convinced. I can't do this kind of thing. Qin Shi snorted but didn't answer. Seeing his reaction, Jing Xingji laughed. You're still talking about me? Haven't you never changed your awkward personality? Qin Shi's expression darkened. He resisted the urge to take out the 3-yang real fire sword and asked calmly in the end, Did you come alone? That passage to the Immortal Palace isn't simple. It wouldn't be strange for a middle-stage nascent soul cultivator to die inside. You didn't just form your nascent soul, did you? Alas. Jing Xingji sighed and said, Qin Shoujing, I don't care about other people, but don't you know? Or are you used to looking down on me because you've always been ahead of me all these years? Upon hearing this, Qin Shi shut his mouth. The two of them met when they were in the foundation building realm and experienced danger together. At that time, he obtained the 3-yang real fire sword and the yang spiritual bead, while Jing Xingji obtained the ancient cultivation sword and sword art he had. It could be said that the harvest from that time was the biggest fated chance they'd had since they started cultivating. With the help of the 3-yang real fire sword and the yang spiritual bead, his cultivation level advanced by leaps and bounds. As for Jing Xingji, although he wasn't as dazzling as him, he knew his abilities couldn't be underestimated. Jing Xingji's gaze shifted between the two of them and he suddenly smiled. I say, the two of you aren't in a very good situation, right? Seeing that Qin Shi was glaring at him, he smiled proudly. There's a rumor in Yunzhong that Fu Yaozi's Fuxing sword is in the hands of the core formation female cultivator Qin Wei. Now it seems that rumor is true. However, although fellow Daoist Qing Wei has the Fuxing sword, the two of you are alone and can't compare to those deep-rooted great forces in Yunzhong. I'm afraid you won't have an easy time among those late-stage nascent soul cultivators, right? So, with Jing Xingji's wisdom, Mo Tiange wasn't surprised he guessed the current situation. However, she wasn't worried he had bad intentions. In any case, their situation was better than Jing Xingji's. He was only an early-stage nascent soul cultivator. Although he had the ability to safely pass through the passage and enter Immortal Palace, there were so many late-stage nascent soul cultivators here, it wouldn't be easy for him to obtain any benefits. Besides, as long as she and Qin Shi met up with Master Daoist Yuanmu and the others and entered the storeroom, they'd be safe. Jing Xingji, on the other hand, wasn't. If that deification refined corpse chased after them again, he might not be able to escape. Under these circumstances, Jing Xingji's intention was very obvious. That's why I want to cooperate with you, he said with a smile. Although I'm only in the early stage of the nascent soul realm, your strength will increase a lot with me around. Sure enough. Mo Tiange looked up at Qin Shi, but she saw that he was still expressionless. Let's talk about your conditions. It's very simple. Jing Xingji stopped smiling and answered seriously, I know fellow Daoist Qing Wei has the Fuxing sword, so you must have more information than I do. Maybe you've already prepared an escape route. As for me, I'm also alone in this immortal palace. Even if there's a fated chance, it won't be my turn. Besides, there's suddenly a deification refined corpse here, so it can be said that there's danger everywhere. Since our situations aren't too good, we might as well cooperate. If I join you, not to mention the fated chance, but my chances of staying alive will greatly increase. As for you, with me, your strength will increase, and you'll have more confidence in negotiating conditions with others. When he finished speaking, Xianxia narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "You're quite confident. Those are late-stage nascent soul cultivators who stand at the peak of the human world. Ordinary early-stage nascent soul or even middle-stage nascent soul cultivators won't be in their eyes at all. Even if you join us, you won't have too much weight. How much weight depends on how strong you are." Xinxia smiled faintly, and a sharp look flashed across his face. "I'm a sword cultivator. Even if my ability is ordinary, I can still fight against ordinary middle-stage nascent soul cultivators. Besides, you know why I'm confident." Xianxia didn't say anything. He seemed to be thinking. After a while, he turned to look at Immortal with a questioning look in his eyes. Immortal smiled at him with trust in her eyes. The corners of his mouth also curled up. "All right," Xianxia said, "although your personality is rotten, I'm quite relieved to cooperate with you." Xinxia protested when he heard what Xianxia said. "What do you mean my personality is rotten?" Xianxia ignored him and continued to say, "Since it's a cooperation, we have to discuss the conditions clearly. Although we're weak, we don't have to cooperate with you. As for you, if you don't cooperate with us and stay in Immortal Palace, your life will be in danger." Xinxia wanted to say something, but in the end, he just spread his hands helplessly. "So, I might as well tell you the truth. We do have a way to avoid this refined corpse. This method requires the help of one thing, and this thing is related to a great fated chance. It wasn't easy for us to obtain this thing, so you can lend me the thing, but the fated chance is yours." Xinxia rolled his eyes. "Is that what you mean?" "Yes," Xianxia said calmly, "the benefit to you is only to save your life. Whether you accept it or not depends on you." Xianxia raised his eyebrows in surprise when he heard the affirmative answer. Xinxia snorted. "Can I not agree? I know you won't let me have the fated chance in Immortal Palace just for nothing. If I were you, I wouldn't agree either." Although this person was annoying, he was a smart person. Immortal smiled. "Fellow Daoist Jing, although we won't let you have this fated chance, you won't necessarily get nothing by participating in this matter." "Yes." Xianxia also smiled. "With your personality, you'll definitely think of ways to get some benefits." Xinxia said, "Since you obtained this thing before, it's normal for you to have such a request. However, if you get anything later, you have to give me a share." "Of course." Xianxia agreed very quickly. "As long as you work hard, there's no reason not to give you a share." Xinxia nodded with satisfaction. "Although your personality is also very annoying, I feel more at ease cooperating with you." Chapter 478. Once again, they saw a cultivator being swallowed by a refined corpse in midair. Immortal and the other two didn't dare to delay any longer and flew towards the storehouse. The day was almost up, so everyone else would gather in the storehouse. As long as they broke the illusory formation and entered the storehouse, they would be safe. With the strength of several late-stage nascent soul cultivators, Immortal didn't doubt they could break the restrictions on the ancient cultivator's cave, but it was hard to say whether they could find enough tokens. She and Xianxia were purely lucky. If Fu Yaozi didn't know there was a spiritual eye cave on Ascetic Cliff, it would have been very difficult for them to compete with other people for the ancient cultivator's cave, let alone find 3 tokens at once. On the way to the storehouse, they encountered another refined corpse. Fortunately, they were vigilant and avoided it early. Later, they found several abandoned caves, found several skeletons that were almost turned into black ashes, and picked up several Qiankuan bags. These caves were located in a valley and weren't of high standard. Obviously, they weren't high-level cultivators, and they only used qiankuan bags instead of qiankuan rings. They looked at the qiankuan bags again. Sure enough, they only had a core formation cultivation level. Although there were some rare materials in the qiankuan bags, they weren't too precious to the three of them, so they divided them casually. It was better than nothing. The journey was daunting but not dangerous. Finally, they arrived at the storehouse before the end of the second day. Fellow Daoist Qin, little friend Imo, you two came really early. There were already people waiting at the door of the storehouse, Yu Shusheng and Han Shizhi. Qin Shi returned the greeting and said faintly, Mr. Yu came early, so things must have gone very smoothly. Yu Shusheng smiled and seemed to be in a good mood. Then his gaze fell on Jing Xingji. May I know who this fellow Daoist is? This is fellow Daoist Jing Xingji, an old friend of mine. We happened to meet before and he helped us, so, oh? Yu Shusheng nodded thoughtfully. So, you two are going to take fellow Daoist Jing with you? This? I don't think I've broken the agreement with you, right? Yu Shusheng's gaze swept over the sword on Jing Xingji's back. He said casually, you can enter the storehouse with tokens. I have no problem with that. Although he said that, the three of them understood his true thoughts. An early-stage nascent soul cultivator, even if he was a sword cultivator, in the midst of so many late-stage nascent soul cultivators, what impact could he have? Besides, the number of people he brought wasn't a problem. The problem was whether this person was trustworthy and whether he would be a burden. Scholar Yu had made the same mistake in the past. He brought two early-stage nascent soul cultivators with him, but not only were they of no help, they almost dragged him down in the passageway. The smartest of them all was still Reverend Nameless. He left all his fellow disciples outside the Immortal Palace and only brought Ju Wu into the Immortal Palace. Jing Xingji's expression did not change in the slightest when he felt this kind of contempt. Scholar Yu didn't even call out to him, and he didn't care either. Minding his own business, he found a corner to sit down and adjust his breathing. He seemed to be unreliable, but since he could live safely in an environment where his fellow disciples were suspicious of him and even cultivate to the late stage of the core formation realm, he certainly had a lot of wisdom about survival. After a simple greeting, the five of them stopped talking. After a while, flight lights flashed over from the distance. They were Reverend Nameless and Ju Wu. She thought the people from Juyen's sect would come back first. After all, they had two late-stage nascent soul cultivators and were the strongest among them. But on second thought, they also had the most people, so it would be even more difficult to get 4 identity tablets and let all 4 of them enter the storehouse. Fellow Daoist Nameless. Great Master. Upon seeing Reverend Nameless, Yu Shusheng and Qin Shi both greeted him. Amongst their group, Reverend Nameless was the most popular, and he was the most trusted. The reason for this was related to the cultivation technique Reverend Nameless cultivated. The teachings of Buddhism were much gentler than those of Taoism and Confucianism. The cultivation technique Reverend Nameless cultivated was obviously quite self-disciplined and had extremely high requirements on one's state of mind. In the cultivation world where people's hearts were unpredictable, people like him were often the first choice to trust. Of course, this wasn't the only reason why Yu Shusheng and Qin Shi were so polite to him. Scholar Yu and Reverend Nameless were old friends. The two of them had been in contact with each other for a long time. As for Qin Shi, he was also grateful to Reverend Nameless for helping him when he entered the passage to Immortal Palace. Their group had a total of 5 people. Apart from Juyen's sect, which was slightly stronger, the strength of each group was about the same. It would be good if they could make an ally. With his eyes still closed, Reverend Nameless greeted everyone with a smile. He didn't even miss the 2 juniors. In the end, he even mentioned Jing Xingji. Fellow Daoist, may I know whose friend you are? Qin Shi still introduced Jing Xingji, hinting that Jing Xingji wanted to join their group. Reverend Nameless' expression didn't change. He nodded slightly and said with a smile, so it's fellow Daoist Jing. Jing Xingji also stood up and saluted back. Greetings, Great Master. After a while, the people from Juyen's sect finally arrived. Master Daoist Yuanmu's expression didn't look good. Master Daoist Iron Mask's black iron mask covered his expression and blocked his divine sense, so no one could see anything unusual. Ling Xiu looked pale and seemed to be injured. Ling Yunhe followed them obediently. Master Daoist Yuanmu's expression darkened even more when he saw the several people either sitting or standing outside the mountain wall. Everyone had returned long ago, and everyone looked quite happy. Obviously, they all got what they wanted. Thinking of the price he paid, how could he be in a good mood? Nevertheless, he still greeted everyone politely and considerately. Moreover, he didn't express any objection to Jing Xingji's arrival. Mo Tiange was very curious. What kind of situation did Juyan sect encounter in the end? With their lineup consisting of 2 late-stage nascent soul cultivators and 1 middle-stage nascent soul cultivator, they were actually in a more difficult situation than the others? This was too unusual. While she was looking, her gaze suddenly met Ling Yunhe's. Ling Yunhe smiled at her. There seemed to be a hint of understanding in his eyes, which made Mo Tiange feel a bit embarrassed. She cupped her hands at him and no longer looked at him. After the 4 groups met, they waited for a long time. During this time, the soul formation stage refined corpse killed a few more cultivators. After that, it wandered aimlessly around the Immortal Palace. More than half a day passed. After this refined corpse swept through the Immortal Palace, almost all the weaker nascent soul cultivators in the Immortal Palace were killed. The only ones left were those late-stage nascent soul cultivators and a few lucky ones. The lucky ones were already on guard and had long hidden far away. The Immortal Palace was so big that even if the refined corpse was in the deification realm, it still couldn't sense human presence too far away. Since it couldn't sense human presence, it was just a puppet. Aside from wandering around unconsciously, it had no other purpose. However, after the massacre, its deterrent power had already been deeply engraved in everyone's hearts. When they were searching for treasures, they were always on guard, lest they ran into this refined corpse and their several hundred years of hard cultivation went up in smoke. Why hasn't fellow Daoist Greifeng come yet? Yu Shusheng raised his head to look at the sky. There were still no flight lights flying near, so he asked this question. No one could answer this question. Only Master Daoist Yuanmu said, perhaps fellow Daoist Greifeng has encountered some trouble. Then, are we still waiting? Yu Shusheng frowned and tapped the folding fan in his hand. There's not much time. In a day, the passage will close, and the divine senses on the 5 holy objects will disperse. There's no way to open it again. If we're locked here, even if we advance to the deification realm, what's the use? Everyone was silent. Yu Shusheng's words were exactly what they were worried about. This Immortal Palace was full of spirit qi. High-grade spirit stones could be found everywhere, and from time to time, ancient spiritual objects could be found. If they could cultivate here, their cultivation speed would be far faster than the outside world. However, the passage to the Immortal Palace was closed, and they couldn't leave. So what if they cultivated to the deification realm? Advancing to the deification realm was to explore the secret of immortality, or even to ascend to become an immortal. If they were locked here, they would end up like that deification refined corpse. Cultivation was meaningless. Moreover, there was a deification refined corpse wandering around in the Immortal Palace. If they stayed here, no matter how they hid, they probably wouldn't be able to escape the fate of being killed. Little friend Mo, after a while, Master Daoist Yuanmu suddenly said, if fellow Daoist Greifeng doesn't come, can we open the illusory formation with our strength? Mo Tiange pondered for a moment then answered, it shouldn't be a problem. Master Daoist Yuanmu smiled and said, since that's the case, let's start. The agreed time has passed, but fellow Daoist Greifeng still hasn't come. We can't keep waiting. Yu Shusheng nodded. Time is tight, so we can only do this. Revered Wu Ming hesitated for a moment, then sighed softly and didn't say anything to oppose. Since they all made such a decision, Qin Shi and Mo Tiange naturally wouldn't have any objections. Greifeng Devil Monarch and his disciple weren't allies, so they were afraid that there were too many people and some people harbored evil intentions. After looking at Xianxia, Xianxia nodded and said, "Alright. Since seniors all think so, let's start." With a decision made, Xianxia didn't waste any time. She took out the 8 trigrams diagram from her sleeve and sorted out the surrounding spiritual aura. Soon after, she took out a bell-shaped magic weapon from her Qiankuan bag. She swung it lightly, and the bell-shaped magic weapon floated in the air. It moved without any wind and emitted a crisp sound. "This is..." Seeing this scene, Yu Shuxing was stunned. Xianxia didn't say anything. She just focused on manipulating the object, making it move along the entire mountain wall. Ding-ling, sounds lingered in everyone's ears. They realized this sound could affect their divine comprehension, so the core formation cultivators hastily calmed their minds and concentrated on guarding their dantians. After watching for a while, Yu Shuxing sighed and said, "So sound waves can be used like this." Upon seeing Han Shizhi's confused expression, he explained, "This treasure uses sound waves as a method to attack the illusory formation. Because the sound wave attack is very light, the illusory formation won't automatically counterattack. However, under this sound wave, the spiritual aura will produce subtle fluctuations. Those who are familiar with formations can use these fluctuations to find the illusory formation's weakness." Right after he finished speaking, the bell-shaped magic weapon stopped. Xianxia said happily, "Seniors, it's over there." Everyone looked up. The weakness of this illusory formation was in a corner of the mountain wall. Xianxia put away the bell-shaped magic weapon, then turned towards Yu Shuxing. "Senior Yu, you don't need me anymore, right?" Yu Shuxing nodded slightly and stepped forward. "Since there's a weakness, it'll be easy. Fellow Daoists, let's attack it together and make a crack." Chapter 479. Several nascent soul cultivators displayed their divine abilities one by one. For a moment, the crack on the mountain wall was filled with flickering lights and astonishing spiritual aura fluctuations. Fortunately, Scholar Yu had arranged a spirit-locking formation to seal the spiritual aura. Otherwise, the movement here would definitely attract the attention of other cultivators in the palace. During this process, Guifeng Devil Monarch and his disciple didn't show up, which surprised Xianxia. She hadn't seen Guifeng Devil Monarch fight, but since he dared to challenge Venerable Avidya and didn't suffer any losses in the end, his divine ability shouldn't be inferior to Venerable Avidya's. He shouldn't have died in the palace, right? But if they didn't encounter a difficult situation, why didn't they rush back to the storehouse? After all, the treasures in the storehouse might be related to fated chances to advance to the deification realm. Fellow Daoists, pay attention. While she was meditating, Master Daoist Jumu suddenly shouted, "The refined corpse seems to be coming this way." Xianxia was shocked and looked up. Sure enough, she saw the devil aura between the mountains seem to be wandering towards them. They were very far away from the refined corpse, so the refined corpse shouldn't be able to sense their breaths. It just happened to be wandering in their direction. But this wasn't a good sign. As long as the refined corpse moved in this direction and reached a certain distance, it would sense their breaths. At that time, "Fellow Daoists, time is running out." Master Daoist Yuanmu shouted. As long as they opened an entrance in the illusory formation, even if the refined corpse came, they could hide in the storehouse. A masterless refined corpse was dead after all. Even if a crack appeared in the illusory formation, it wouldn't know how to distinguish it and would leave on its own. If they couldn't open the illusory formation in time, they would have no choice but to run when faced with the refined corpse. All the nascent soul cultivators knew the situation was urgent. Without Master Daoist Yuanmu saying anything, they all took out their trump cards. Without hesitation, Venerable Avidya pinched a Buddhist bead and chanted the name of Buddha. The Buddhist bead in his hand burst into a dazzling golden light, releasing a surging spiritual breath that pressed down on the hole in the illusory formation. With a puff, the hole that was only the size of a soybean suddenly split open. The surrounding mountain walls shattered one after another and became invisible, while the hole became the size of a fist. Upon seeing this, Daoist Master Yuan Mu took out the Linglong Pagoda and smashed it towards the gap. Qin she cast a sword art, and the 3 Yang real fire sword returned to its original form. The real fire on the body of the sword burned more and more fiercely, until in the end, it almost turned into a ball of flame. All of a sudden, it turned into a meteor and crashed into Qin Shi. Jing Xingji also took out his flying sword, and the bright sword light immediately dazzled everyone's eyes. For a moment, these nascent soul cultivators who didn't think much of him cast sidelong glances at him. Emotienga noticed that Ling Xiu seemed to be heavily injured. The power of his divine abilities was far from what it used to be. As for Master Daoist Yuanmu and Master Daoist Iron Mask, they also didn't seem to be as strong as before. She thought to herself, could it be that the people from the Zhiyan sect have suffered greatly in the process of searching for the token? For the current situation, this was not good news. It would not be easy to open this gap. While she was muttering to herself, all the nascent soul cultivators were doing their best to expand the gap in the illusory formation bit by bit. However, if they wanted to expand it to the point where one person could enter, it would take time. Perfected Yuanmu looked at the approaching corpses, his expression anxious. If this goes on, we won't make it in time. Then what should we do? Scholar Yu's expression was heavy. If we escape first, we can't. The one who spoke was Venerable Avidya. His tone was very solemn. Not to mention whether everyone can escape. Even if everyone escapes, it won't be easy for us to regroup. Besides, we don't have much time. What fellow Daoist Avidya said is reasonable. Master Daoist Iron Mask rarely spoke. This illusory formation will take a long time even if we join hands. If a few more fellow Daoists don't come back. Right now, they had 4 late-stage nascent soul cultivators, 2 middle-stage nascent soul cultivators, and 1 early-stage nascent soul cultivator. Ling Xiu couldn't do what he wanted, and he couldn't even compare to an early-stage nascent soul cultivator. As for Master Daoist Yuanmu and Master Daoist Iron Mask, they more or less lost some of their strength. Guifang Devil Monarch didn't come back. If it weren't for Jing Xingji, who made up the numbers, they really didn't know how long it would take for them to break through. Emotienga also didn't expect this kind of situation. Although she intentionally or unintentionally wanted the others to suffer a bit so that she and Qin Shi wouldn't be bullied too much, she didn't expect that Zhiyan sect's group would actually encounter a setback while searching for the identity tablets, thereby affecting their overall strength. Master Daoist Junmu clenched his teeth and said resolutely, Mr. Yu, Senior Martial Brother Iron Mask, can the 2 of you go and stop them? Scholar Yu was stunned for a moment, then his expression turned unhappy. Fellow Daoist Yuanmu, those are deification corpses. I don't have the ability to stop them. Although they were now collaborators, stopping the refined corpses was a very dangerous matter. One careless mistake and they might lose their lives. Who would be willing to sacrifice themselves? Master Daoist Junmu was a bit flustered and exasperated, but he restrained himself and said patiently, Mr. Yu, among the 7 of us, Junior Martial Brother Ling's strength has declined greatly. Fellow Daoist Avidya, fellow Daoist Qin, fellow Daoist Jing, and me, our divine abilities are relatively powerful. Junior Martial Brother Iron Mask mainly cultivates defensive divine abilities, while you're proficient in miscellaneous studies and quite quick-witted. Who else is more suitable than the 4 of you? Scholar Yu's expression was still sullen, and he didn't answer. That being said, he didn't have the confidence to escape unscathed when facing a deification corpses. Why should he take this risk? If something happened to him, Han Shizhi alone wouldn't be able to obtain the fortuitous encounter on this trip. Without anyone to protect him, he wouldn't even be able to get out of the passage to the Immortal Palace. His Zhiyan sect, on the other hand, had the advantage in numbers, and Iron Mask Enlightened was about to pass away in meditation. He had long since stopped managing matters, so what if he lost them? Mr. Yu. Seeing that the refined corpses were getting closer and closer, Master Daoist Junmu suddenly took out a token from his bosom. If you're willing, this token belongs to you. How about it? Seeing the token for the storeroom, everyone was shocked. Even Scholar Yu found it hard to believe. They didn't expect that Master Daoist Yuanmu would actually be willing to pay such a price. A token was a numinous treasure, and the storeroom was filled with the treasures of the great ancient sections. The value of a numinous treasure was unfathomable, and he was actually willing to take it out? What's more, the others also had a share in this matter, and he actually didn't ask the other two parties to pay the price as well. Mr. Yu, this matter mustn't be delayed. Master Daoist Yuanmu said one last sentence as he stared closely at Scholar Yu. Scholar Yu looked pensive as he stared at the token. In the end, he said decisively, "Fine. Since fellow Daoist Yuanmu is willing to pay such a price, what else can I say? Fellow Daoist Iron Mask, let's go." Once he finished speaking, he put away the token, then summoned his flying magic weapon and flew towards the place where the deification refined corpses were. Master Daoist Iron Mask didn't even spare them a glance and followed closely behind them. Before long, the two late-stage nascent soul cultivators entered the refined corpses' sensing range. Now that the refined corpses had a target, they immediately chased after them. Scholar Yu and Master Daoist Iron Mask retreated while leading the way. Scholar Yu kept using talismans to transform into spiritual objects, trying to lead the refined corpses in another direction. Watching this scene, Xianxia suddenly couldn't understand. As the head Grand Supreme Elder of the No. 1 cultivation group in Yunzhong, she absolutely didn't doubt Master Daoist Yuanmu's schemes. Before this, Master Daoist Yuanmu never backed down when it came to Jiuyan sect's interests, let alone taking the initiative to suffer a loss. But now, he actually took out the tokens so straightforwardly. After all, if they couldn't open the illusory formation, it would affect everyone, including Scholar Yu. Even if they wanted to compensate Scholar Yu, they didn't need to pay the token for the storehouse. Moreover, they could also ask the other two parties to pay something. They just needed time to discuss it. But he was more anxious than anyone else and looked like he didn't want to take any risks at all. Could it be that there was something more important than the storehouse token, so he couldn't care less and only wanted to safely avoid this disaster? Xianxia's gaze swept over Master Daoist Yuanmu and Ling Xiu. Then what was it in the end? Manpower? Fellow Daoist Mo, a low voice rang in her ears. Xianxia turned around and saw Ling Yunhe. Although there was a smile on Ling Yunhe's face, his gaze was solemn. He stared at Xianxia and said faintly, "We're not enemies. It's better not to get to the bottom of some things." She paused for a moment, then smiled and nodded at him. "Thank you for the reminder, fellow Daoist Ling." After saying that, she once again looked at the people who were breaking the formation, but she only focused on the gap in the illusory formation. Ling Yunhe secretly heaved a sigh of relief and anxiously looked at the two late nascent soul cultivators who were dealing with the refined corpse in the distance. Then he glanced at Ling Xiu, who was temporarily resting. Time passed bit by bit. Scholar Yu and Master Daoist Iron Face were surrounded by danger, so they simply led the refined corpse and fled into the distance. Unfortunately, the cultivators who could be used as cannon fodder in the Immortal Palace were almost all killed by the refined corpse. Their speed wasn't fast enough to get rid of the refined corpse, so they could only drag on like this. Without the help of the two late nascent soul cultivators, it would take more time to break the illusory formation. But there was nothing they could do. If no one led the refined corpse away, they wouldn't be able to break the illusory formation before the refined corpse arrived, even if they all worked together. Guifeng Devil Monarch and his disciples still didn't show up. Xianxia couldn't help but wonder if something had happened to them. Guifeng Devil Monarch was fine, but when she thought of Yang Qingji, she felt a bit regretful. Yang Qingji was arrogant and awkward, but he wasn't a bad person. He was just a bit stubborn. If she got along with him for a long time, maybe they could become friends. Thinking up to this point, she suddenly realized her mentality had changed. When she was young, she was sensitive and suspicious. It was only after she came to Xianxing school and had a master and fellow disciples that she slowly opened up a bit, but she still wasn't willing to get too close to others. But now, she actually wanted to become friends with others. Perhaps it was because her heart was strong that she wasn't afraid to get along with others and even trusted them. Fellow Daoists, it's almost done. Master Daoist Yuanmu shouted. Mo Tiange took a look. Just a little bit more and the gap would be big enough for one person to pass through. She turned to look at the distance. In midair, Scholar Yu and Master Daoist Iron Face were still entangled with the refined corpse. Scholar Yu seemed to be running out of spiritual aura. He paused for a moment and was about to be caught by the refined corpse. Fortunately, he dodged in time. Soon after, he kept releasing illusionary talismans, each of which transformed into a spiritual object to confuse the refined corpse. This kind of talisman was very difficult to make. Although Mo Tiange wasn't proficient in talismans, she knew this kind of illusionary talisman wasn't something for core formation cultivators, so its price was no different from ordinary magic weapons. Scholar Yu used it so generously that in just a short while, he probably spent tens of thousands of spirit stones. She anxiously looked at the gap in the illusionary formation. If Scholar Yu couldn't hold on, he definitely wouldn't sacrifice himself and lead the refined corpse elsewhere. If she still couldn't break it, all her efforts would be in vain. Rumble! As if the heavens heard her prayers, several people's joyful voices rang in her ears. It's done! Chapter 480. Let's go! With the opening of the illusory formation, no one hesitated and rushed inside. Master Daoist Yuanmu was also relieved. He turned around and sent a sound-transmitting talisman to Master Iron Mask and Scholar Yu in the distance. As soon as she entered the illusory formation, Mo Tiange raised her eyebrows in surprise. This storehouse was actually an ice cave. The whole space was irregular and filled with glittering ice cubes. There was no trace of human construction. Just as everyone finished looking around, Scholar Yu and Master Iron Mask came in awkwardly. Mo Tiange turned to look at the opening of the illusory formation. In midair, the refined corpse was devouring the illusionary talismans left by Scholar Yu. When it finished devouring, it suddenly lost its two targets. It wandered around in a daze before finally wandering away. She felt relieved. This illusory formation was really powerful. Even with such a small opening, their breaths didn't leak out. Dead things like the refined corpse couldn't be distinguished at all. Mr. Yu, thank you for your hard work, Master Daoist Yuanmu said politely when he saw Scholar Yu. Scholar Yu said with a pale face, since I accepted fellow Daoist Yuanmu's things, I naturally have to do it. Then, he said reluctantly, I didn't accept fellow Daoist Yuanmu's token for nothing. I lost a lot to lure that refined corpse away. Mo Tiange thought about the illusionary talismans Scholar Yu threw out. Each one cost tens of thousands of spirit stones. He fought with the refined corpse for a long time, so he must have lost hundreds of thousands of spirit stones. Although hundreds of thousands of spirit stones weren't unbearable for late nascent soul cultivators, how could the talismans used by late nascent soul cultivators be ordinary? They probably couldn't buy them even if they wanted to. Then, everyone's attention returned to the storehouse. After walking along the ice cave for a while, they finally arrived in front of a stone door. This stone door was painted with strange golden patterns, which emitted a strong momentum and made it difficult to approach. This should be the defensive restriction of the storehouse. Sensing the unfathomable power of the restriction, Master Daoist Yuanmu sighed, such a restriction. No wonder little friend Mo said it's impossible. Based on his knowledge, this restriction was definitely beyond the deification realm. It seemed this great ancient sect had high-level cultivators beyond the deification realm. However, the sect might have declined after the war between the righteous and devil path, so the elders were only in the deification realm. Everyone looked around and found that there was a small depression in the middle of the patterns, which matched the size of their tokens. Master Daoist Yuanmu glanced around and found that there was a small depression in the size of the token. Reverend Yuanmu swept a glance at her and said indifferently, "Of course." In front of so many people, he didn't have the face to do something that would ruin his own identity. Daoist Yuanmu Dao, Junior will be. And Junior will. After saying those words, he took a step forward and took out his token, intending to place it in the recess of the stone door. Wait! Xianxia pulled her back and whispered, "I'll go first." Master of Qi said, "Demon." Due to the limitations of her cultivation, there were many things she could only stand at the back. If she wanted to get out of this situation, she had to form her nascent soul as soon as possible. She took out the storeroom's identity tablet from his Qinkuan bag and gently placed it in the recess on the stone door. The restriction on the stone door flashed with a white light, covering the identity tablet. The identity tablet also shone with a white light, which shone together with the restriction on the stone door. Then, with a flash of white light, the token fell to the ground, and the stone door silently opened. She took the token, looked around, and cautiously took the first step. The restriction on the stone door didn't respond. After a moment of hesitation, she stepped inside. He turned around and was about to say something, but the stone door was closed. When everyone saw him enter safely, they were relieved. This proved the King Dragon token was indeed effective. Their time today wasn't wasted. Upon seeing this, Mo Tiange did the same thing. "Little friend Mo," Scholar Yu suddenly said. Mo Tiange paused and asked nervously, "Mr. Yu, what can I do for you?" Scholar Yu shook his head and said, "Although we've made an agreement, you can't keep staying here and waste everyone's time. How about 1 hour? If you don't come out in 1 hour, we'll go in." Mo Tiange didn't answer immediately. Such a big sect had a huge storehouse. It wasn't easy to understand all the treasures in 1 hour and make a decision. But what Scholar Yu said wasn't unreasonable. Although they agreed to let her enter the storehouse first, they couldn't ignore their own interests and let them waste their time. She glanced at Master Daoist Yuanmu and the others. They didn't say anything, which meant they tacitly agreed to Scholar Yu's proposal. She hesitated for a moment but eventually nodded. Okay. She'd already obtained the right to enter the storehouse first. If she still had any objections, these late nascent soul cultivators would most likely have objections. Seeing that she was sensible, Scholar Yu smiled and waved the folding fan in his hand. "Please." Mo Tiange turned around, put away the token, and entered the storehouse. Jing Xingji was next. The stone door behind them closed silently, and the three of them met in the storehouse. "It's so big." Jing Xingji looked around in surprise. This storehouse was also a huge ice cave, almost bottomless. Countless treasures floated in the air, emitting a bright light. These treasures were surrounded by spiritual aura and glinted faintly. They should be defensive restrictions that could only be opened by the tokens in their hands. These treasures didn't need to be examined carefully. With one glance, they could see that they were definitely existences that surpassed the current cultivation world. After Jing Xingji joined them, although he'd been pretending to be invisible, he could already see what was going on with his shrewdness. He'd long guessed that they'd found an absolutely amazing fated chance with these late nascent soul cultivators, but he still didn't expect it to be such a magnificent scene. Any one of these items would cause a sensation in the world of cultivators. "Fellow Daoist Jing?" Mo Tiange looked at him with a smile. Jing Xingji curled his lips, threw the token back to her, and muttered, "Are you afraid I'll go back on my word?" "That's hard to say," Mo Tiange said bluntly. "Do you dare say you're not tempted when you look at these things?" Jing Xingji rolled his eyes helplessly, but he couldn't say anything to refute her. How could he not be tempted? In fact, when he saw these things, an idea indeed emerged in his mind. He wanted to take the token for himself. He'd been in the cultivation world for almost 300 years. He'd been to many secret places and seen even more treasures. However, only the spiritual treasures he and Xianxia obtained when they first met could compare to the things in front of him. Fortunately, he was still rational. Not to mention that he couldn't defeat Xianxia. Even if he could, there were still so many late nascent soul cultivators outside. Without enough strength, how could he leave safely? 1 hour. Hurry up. Since he had no fate with them, he simply found a corner to sit cross-legged and regulate his breath, no longer paying attention to them. Mo Tiange and Xianxia glanced at each other. Without wasting any time, the two of them quickly began to look for treasures. 7 treasures: heart-gathering lotus, immortal-slaying soul-destroying sword, nephrite holy spirit, diamond cold iron, great heavenly thunder spell. These treasures were too much for the two of them to take in. The treasures floating in the air were all distant past-era spiritual treasures that couldn't be found in the current cultivation world. Senior Martial Brother. More than half an hour passed in the blink of an eye, but the two of them still hadn't finished looking at the treasures in the storeroom. Tiange pondered for a moment, then called Qinshi. There's only a quarter of an hour left. We can't finish looking at them. Let's make a decision quickly. Looking at the countless treasures in front of them, Qinshi sighed regretfully and nodded. And there's not much time. It's impossible to finish looking at them. Then tell me, what should we choose? Qinshi thought for a moment, then said, although you have a lot of magic weapons, you lack powerful attacking methods. It'd be better to choose this great heavenly thunder technique. Tiange looked at the side of this great heavenly thunder technique. There was a simple introduction. Thunder spells can be practiced by people with metal spiritual roots. Those with thunder spiritual roots will have the best effects. When practiced to the highest realm, the power can be comparable to heavenly thunder. Heavenly thunder. This was the most powerful spell in the cultivation world. Tiange pondered for a moment. What Qinshi said was right. Most of her magic weapons had strange uses, but they weren't very powerful. Her natal magic weapon, the Heaven and Earth Fan, wasn't good at attacking. Sometimes she also needed a thunderous strike. The fact that this great heavenly thunder technique was placed in the storeroom instead of the scripture pavilion showed that it was a peerless cultivation technique. Thunder spells were famous for their power. She had all 5 elements' spiritual roots. Although the thunder spells she practiced weren't as good as those with pure thunder spiritual roots, with the help of medicinal pills, it shouldn't be a problem. Then the second one, you guys go to the back. A voice suddenly sounded in her mind. Tiange was startled, but she soon said happily, Master, have you rested enough? Fu Yaozi said faintly, there's a book at the back of the storeroom. We must get it. Tiange? Qinshi called out when he saw that she suddenly became silent. Tiange didn't explain. She pulled his hand and walked in the direction Fu Yaozi pointed. Let's go. After entering the Immortal Palace, this kind of situation was very common. Qinshi was already used to it, so he didn't ask anything and just followed her to the back. The third spiritual treasure from the back was a book. There was a line of golden ancient characters on the animal skin cover, Jade Bone Puppet Technique. There was an introduction next to it. Using jade bones as the frame and nephrite Holy Spirit as the body, it can be made into a puppet. The highest realm the puppet can reach is the deification realm. Although the introduction was simple, the two of them couldn't help but gasp. A deification realm puppet. If it was made, wouldn't it run amok in the human world? The word jade bone immediately reminded them of the crystal skeleton they got from the ancient cultivator's cave. Tiange asked, Master, did you ask me to put away the skeleton for this? Fu Yaozi smiled and said, I saw you were very interested in the art of engineering, so I thought you'd also be interested in this. But she was a bit hesitant. Can this jade bone puppet really be made? The materials needed must be very precious, right? So, it depends on whether you're willing to gamble or not, Fu Yaozi said faintly. Jade bones as the frame and nephrite Holy Spirit as the body. There's also nephrite Holy Spirit in this storeroom. If you want this puppet technique, you must take the nephrite Holy Spirit as the third item. As for the other materials, I haven't read this book, so I don't know if I can collect them all. It's up to you. What's wrong? Qinshi asked. Tiange sighed and relayed Fu Yaozi's words to him. In the end, she said, we only have 2 chances. If we want this puppet technique, we must take the nephrite Holy Spirit as the third item. However, we don't know whether it can be made into a puppet or not. This was a gamble. If they won, they'd get a puppet with outstanding strength, but if they lost, they'd wasted 2 chances in vain. Chapter 481. Let's do it. Qinshi said when the hour was almost up. Tiange glanced at him. Seeing his determined expression, she also felt like staking everything on one throw. Let's do it. Aren't they just two supreme spiritual treasures? Even if they don't have them, they still have to advance to the deification realm. With that thought, she took out the token, erased the restriction on the jade bone puppet technique, put the book away, and took out the Holy Spirit nephrite. After putting away the things, the two of them looked at each other and couldn't help but sigh. Seeing each other sigh, they smiled at each other. Although they made up their minds to bet, they were still a bit nervous about the outcome. After all, the price was too high. Let's go. Xianxia said, let's leave quickly while they come in to choose the treasures. Tiange also thought so. The others entered the storehouse. This many treasures were enough to buy them some time. They had to leave far away during this time. Otherwise, it would be really unsafe to stay with a group of people who were stronger than them. Fu Yaozi's voice rang in their minds again. The hour is up. Outside the storehouse, Scholar Yu knocked the folding fan in his hand and looked at the others. Fellow Daoists, shall we go in now? Master Daoist Yuanmu and the others were resting with their eyes closed. When they heard this, they opened their eyes, which shone brightly. Venerable Avidya also smiled and looked at the stone door. Then, these late-stage nascent cultivators opened the stone door one by one and went inside in a line. When they entered the storehouse, the light of the spiritual treasures dazzled everyone's eyes. Even though they were the top nascent late-stage cultivators in the mortal realm and had seen countless spiritual treasures, they still felt their hearts palpitate in the face of these innumerable treasures that surpassed the realm of nascent soul. Even someone as cunning as Reverend Yuanmu could not restrain his greed. Needless to say, as long as they had a few spiritual treasures here, they could laugh proudly in the human world. After exclaiming, Scholar Yu looked at Master Daoist Yuanmu warily and then glanced at Venerable Avidya. Venerable Avidya looked calm, but he suddenly opened his eyes and smiled at him. This smile set Scholar Yu's heart at ease. These treasures that were far beyond the current level of the immortal cultivation world were indeed hot-headed. If Zhiyan's sect relied on their own strength to snatch the token by force, he was not confident that he could escape unscathed. However, if he had the support of Reverend Wu Ming, things would be different. Zhiyan's sect had 2 late-stage nascent soul cultivators and 1 mid-stage nascent soul cultivator. Among them, Ling Xiu was injured and did not have much combat strength. If the Buddhist and Confucian duo joined forces, they would have 2 late-stage nascent soul cultivators, which was enough to contend against Zhiyan's sect. At this time, Reverend Yuanmu's gaze also swept over the 2 of them. In the end, he wisely put away the greed in his eyes and said to them with a smile, "Fellow Daoists, there are so many treasures here, we don't have to be polite. Let's hurry." The 3 of them nodded and smiled. Then, they led their juniors to look through the treasures in the treasury. At this moment, Ling Yunhe, who was following beside spiritual master Yuanmu, looked around and suddenly said, "Martial Uncle Yuanmu, where are the 3 of them?" Perfected Yuanmu was slightly taken aback before his expression changed. When Scholar Yu and revered Wu Ming heard this, they turned around as well. Although the storeroom was huge and had layers of restrictions, they were all late nascent soul cultivators, so they could sense whether or not someone was inside. Aside from them, there was no one else here. Where did Tiange and the other 2 go in the end? They were always outside the storeroom, but they didn't see them come out at all. Mr. Yu. Master Yuanmu looked at Scholar Yu. Scholar Yu muttered to himself, "How's this possible?" It was impossible for a big cultivation group's storeroom to have other exits. They also didn't find any other exits, so how could those 3 people disappear into thin air? The restrictions inside the storeroom weren't to be trifled with. Without needing to be told, Ling Yunhe, Han Shizhi, and Zhu Wu began to run around. Although the storeroom was big, with the 3 of them working together, it didn't take them long to turn it upside down. They didn't find anything unusual at all. The 5 nascent soul cultivators' expressions became even more grave. The situation before their eyes was completely beyond their expectations. It even made them temporarily forget that the whole storeroom was filled with spiritual treasures. The gap between realms was insurmountable. Even nascent soul cultivators like them felt the restrictions inside the storeroom were unfathomable. They were sure they were ancient restrictions that surpassed the deification realm. Surrounded by such restrictions, it was impossible for them to ignore the restrictions and leave the storeroom. In that case, where did they go in the end? Was there another passage inside the storeroom, or? Scholar Yu looked at Master Yuan Mu and saw the same vigilance in his eyes. He knew that the two of them were thinking the same thing. His expression didn't change as he sent a voice transmission through his divine sense. Fellow Daoist Yuan Mu, are you thinking that they're still inside the storeroom? Master Yuan Mu nodded slightly and replied, that's right. If they obtain some ancient spiritual treasure that can conceal their aura. At this point, the two of them looked a little gloomy. If that was the case, the three of them definitely harbored evil intentions towards them. This old monk thinks that the two of you are worrying too much, revered Wu Ming suddenly said. Scholar Yu and Master Yuan Mu's voice transmission could not be heard by others, but with revered Wu Ming's cultivation, it was not a problem. Seeing that revered Wu Ming had directly spoken, Scholar Yu looked around with some apprehension before saying, "Oh? What do you think, fellow Daoist Wu Ming?" Revered Wu Ming said with a smile, "Among the three of them, one is mid-stage nascent soul, one is early-stage nascent soul, and one has yet to form his nascent soul. What means do they have to kill all of us without being able to resist? Under normal circumstances, of course it's impossible," Master Yuan Mu said with a heavy voice. "However, the three of them entered the storeroom earlier than us, so it's very likely that they obtained some kind of spiritual treasure. If they relied on spiritual treasures, they wouldn't be able to do it unless those treasures could erupt with formidable power in an instant." Revered Wu Ming said slowly, neither hurriedly nor slowly, "This place is the important storeroom of this distant past great cultivation group. It's heavily guarded." The storeroom was an important place and heavily guarded. It absolutely wouldn't allow others to use magic weapons and spells at will. This was a common principle among every cultivation group. Otherwise, if other treasures were destroyed, the foundation of a cultivation group would be damaged. Master Yuan Mu's and Scholar Yu's expressions slowly eased. If that was the case, no matter what method the three of them used to disappear inside the storeroom, they didn't need to pay attention to them anymore. However, they inevitably felt it was a pity that the three of them took away some kind of spiritual treasure. At this time, the three of them were in the middle of a fierce battle. In the dark stone room, cultivators could only see several dozen feet ahead, but countless malicious devils were surging towards them. The three of them stood back to back, each relying on their magic weapons to fight the devils. "I say, fellow Daoist Jingwei." Although Jing Xingji had advanced into the nascent soul realm, he still habitually addressed Mo Tiange as his peer. It was unknown whether it was because of Qin Shi or because Mo Tiange was about to advance. "What the hell is this place? How can there be so many devils?" "I don't know what's going on either." Mo Tiange frowned. With two nascent soul cultivators by her side, they shared most of the devils, so she didn't feel much pressure. "Maybe it's been too long." When they were about to leave the storeroom, Fu Yaozi stopped her and told her there was a passage in the storeroom that led directly to the underground palace, which was the Vermilion Bird Sacrificial Temple. Mo Tiange was overjoyed when she heard this news. She was worried she couldn't leave safely after obtaining the treasures. If that was the case, there was no need to meet Master Yuan Mu and the others. Therefore, the three of them went directly to the underground palace from the storeroom. They planned to explore the underground palace first and then leave the palace through other exits. But what they didn't expect was that not long after they went down to the underground palace, they found that the primordial devil aura inside was seriously leaking and even attracted a group of devils. Some of these devils were refined corpses, and some were demonized demonic beasts. Although their cultivation levels weren't very high, they were very difficult to deal with. Thinking up to this point, Mo Tiange couldn't help but ask, "Master, letting me leave through this secret passage was something you planned long ago, wasn't it? At that time, I was alone. If I encountered these devils after coming down, how could I leave safely?" Fu Yaozi paused for a moment, then answered with a bitter smile, "This was indeed my fault. When I went down to the underground palace, these devils weren't there. So, Master, you never thought that after 100,000 years, this place would become unsafe. If I really came down here alone, it would be fate for me to die here. Fu Yaozi didn't answer, which could be considered as a tacit agreement. Xianxia secretly rolled her eyes. Fortunately, she was lucky. Xianxia met her at the entrance, and before that, she also ran into Xinji. With the two nascent soul cultivators by his side, although these devils were difficult to deal with, they weren't a problem. They killed their way out of the stone room, killed their way through several passages, and finally killed all these devils. The three of them heaved sighs of relief, then found a safe place to sit cross-legged and adjust their breaths. Fellow Daoist Jingwei, what's going on? Shouldn't you tell me? Xinji asked as he closed his eyes to adjust his breath. The matter of the Vermilion Bird's sacrificial temple was indeed complicated. I didn't get any benefits from cooperating with you, but I had to fight here. You still won't tell me clearly. This is too unfair. What do you mean you didn't get any benefits? She said with a snort. At least you escaped the pursuit of that deification-refined corpse. Do you want me to settle the account with you first? This time, Xinji couldn't say anything. When he was chased by that refined corpse, if she didn't turn around and put a spiritual talisman to stop it, it would be hard to say whether he could escape or not. In fact, it might not have saved his whole life, but at least half of it was saved. Looking at Xinji's speechless appearance, Xianxia suddenly felt a bit sorry for him. In fact, Xinji was really unlucky. He used to be the brilliant disciple of Venerable Swordsman, a nascent soul cultivator of Gujian sect. He was talented and had an extraordinary status. Unexpectedly, his master died and he lost his backer. He was suppressed by his master's enemies everywhere, and his status plummeted. Later, he cultivated to the late stage of the core formation realm by relying on his wisdom and temperament. If he could enter the nascent soul realm in one fell swoop, it would be considered a success. However, he was schemed against by Master Song Feng on Demonic Mountain with her. Not only did he not get any fated chances, but he also completely fell out with Gujian sect's ruling faction on the way back and was seriously injured. Because of his injuries, he couldn't even go back to his sect, so he had to find another place to go. He left the celestial pole and became an individual cultivator. From a proud son of heaven to a wandering individual cultivator, people couldn't help but shed tears of sympathy for him. This was fine. After all, everyone had bad times. But the problem was, with Xianxia next to him, he looked extremely pitiful. The two of them were actually very similar. They were both brilliant disciples of nascent soul cultivators from famous cultivation groups, and they were both young and had high cultivation levels. In terms of aptitude, Xianxia definitely wasn't better than him. In terms of status, the two of them were originally about the same, but their encounters were really as different as heaven and earth. When he left the celestial pole in a sorry state, Xianxia had formed his nascent soul with boundless glory and became the Grand Supreme Elder of Xianqing School. Now, when they reunited in a foreign land, he was once again suppressed by Xianxia. If she were Xinji, she would definitely sigh. The existence of a Xianxia in this world was simply the heavens deliberately trying to disgust him. Chapter 482. Xianxia had told Xianxia about her conjecture about the sacrificial temple in detail. Seeing that Xianxia didn't seem to have any objections, she said to Xinji, "According to our conjecture, this place should be a relic from the distant past era." Distant past? Xinji opened his eyes with a solemn expression. "Are you sure it's the distant past era? I told you it's just a conjecture." Xianxia was very calm. This place might be worshipping Vermilion Bird, one of the 5 spirits from the distant past era. We need to verify whether it's true or not. Vermilion Bird? Xinji muttered. Xianxia looked at him and added, "In addition, there's also a primordial devil steel here, which is the source of the devil aura. Then what should we do?" Xianxia smiled and said, "First, find that primordial devil steel and take it with us if possible. I won't hide it from fellow Daoist Jing. This sacrificial temple doesn't only worship the 5 spirits, but it also has the remains of the real 5 spirits. What? Jing Xingji cried out involuntarily. The 5 spirits were the legendary spiritual beings, the symbols of the gods in the distant past era, and the creatures closest to the gods before humans started cultivating. They were born with supernatural abilities, powerful and holy. They could fly to heaven and enter the earth, and only gods could control them. He learned about these things from ancient books when he stepped on the path of immortality, but he never thought he could see the remains of the 5 spirits with his own eyes. That was an era too far away from the present. Fellow Daoist Jing, you didn't lose anything this time, right? Mo Tiange asked with a smile. Jing Xingji calmed down a bit and said, if that's the case, I owe you a favor. A relic from the distant past era worshipping the remains of the vermilion bird. Not to mention whether he could get any fated chances from it, just bringing him here was a great favor. After thinking for a while, Jing Xingji sighed and said, what's the origin of this great ancient sect? They actually built their immortal palace on the sacrificial temple of the distant past era. This sect must have been extremely prosperous in the beginning, but unfortunately, it couldn't escape the laws of heaven and earth, Xianxia said flatly, still adjusting his breath with his eyes closed. Yes, the laws of heaven and earth. Jing Xingji sighed. Such a great sect was unexpectedly torn into an independent space and destroyed overnight. The more I cultivate, the more I feel that the power of heaven and earth is truly terrifying. The more you know, the more fearful you will be. Only the ignorant can be fearless. Xianxia chuckled. He opened his eyes and said, if that wasn't the case, why would we cultivate in the first place? We are all mortals who want to escape the power of heaven and earth and dream of immortality. Unfortunately, no one knows if we can reach the end of this path. In the primeval age, there were many legends about ascending to the immortal realm. In the primeval age, there were people who cultivated to the Mahayana stage and faced the tribulations. But now, even the soul formation stage had become a legend. Thinking of this, the 3 of them each had their own experiences, and for a moment, they were silent. After a while, Mo Tiange said, have you all rested well? We should continue. There's not much time left. There's only one last day. Upon hearing this, Xianxia and Jing Xingji stopped to adjust their breaths and stood up to prepare. Following the dim stone path, the 3 slowly moved forward. This vermilion bird sacrificial temple was similar to the azure dragon sacrificial temple Mo Tiange visited, but it was also different. The material used to build this temple was a kind of fiery red stone, which carried the aura of the fire essence. Xianxia guessed that these stones must have been taken from a place where the fire essence was extremely strong. After accumulating for many years, they carried the aura of the fire essence. If they were here today, they would be excellent materials for refining fire attribute magic weapons. However, they didn't plan to demolish the temple because that would be too disrespectful to the vermilion bird worshipped here. Cultivators like them didn't respect ghosts or gods, and they didn't fear the world, but deep in their hearts, they still had some taboos. After walking for a while, they encountered another group of demonic creatures. In this sacrificial temple, there was a serious leakage of devil aura, and there were a lot of demonic creatures. Unfortunately, these demonic creatures were useless to cultivators like them, so they could only abandon them after killing them. If there were devil cultivators here, they would definitely be overjoyed. Mo Tiange thought of Yang Qingji. When they broke the illusory formation in the storeroom, he still hadn't appeared. Did the master and disciple really die here? She found it hard to believe, but in this immortal palace, anything could happen. Even if Gui Feng Devil Monarch's cultivation level was in the late nascent soul stage, he couldn't guarantee anything. After killing another group of demonic creatures and bypassing a mass of devil aura, Xianxia, who was walking in the front, suddenly stopped. What's wrong? This aura. The one who spoke was Jing Xingji. He had already advanced into the nascent soul realm, so his senses were sharper than Mo Tiange's. Xianxia didn't answer and continued to walk forward. Mo Tiange followed closely behind him. After a while, She indeed felt something unusual. Without the devil aura obstructing them, she could clearly feel an aura pervading the surroundings. It was blazing and sacred, vast and pure, carrying an ancient and boundless aura. This aura was somewhat similar to the Azure Dragon's breath she felt before, but it was also different. The Azure Dragon's breath was restrained and tranquil, as if they were in a boundless forest, inclusive and full of vitality. This kind of aura, however, carried a passion and exuberant vitality that could burn everything. "The vermilion bird's breath," she whispered. "It should be. Let's go." Xianxia sped up. The three of them were practically running on the stone path. Finally, when they reached the end of the stone path, their eyes suddenly opened up. This was a hall with a tall and heavy stone door engraved with a fiery red totem. Inside the hall stood huge stone pillars, all of which were painted with fiery red patterns. As they slowly walked inside, a towering stone statue gradually appeared in front of them. Its wings were spread open, its head held high, and it carried an aura that could burn everything. One of the 5 spirits, the vermilion bird. The three of them didn't say anything for a long time and just stared blankly. They were all high-level cultivators, so the pressure from the vermilion bird's breath wasn't strong enough to frighten them, but the boundless aura from the distant past era shocked them. Xianxia was the first to return to her senses. She had seen the Azure Dragon statue before, so she wasn't too shocked when she saw the vermilion bird statue. "Look, what's that?" Upon hearing her voice, Xianxia and Xingji looked in the direction she was pointing and were both stunned. They saw a bow and arrows on the altar in front of the statue. The bow had a golden body and a fiery red bowstring. Its power was astonishing. "This is..." Xingji was the first to exclaim. This bow and arrow had a strong vermilion bird's aura. As long as they got a little closer, they would feel like they were being burned. This thing definitely wasn't a magic weapon that could be refined in the current cultivation world. Even those amazing distant past-era spiritual treasures in the storehouse couldn't compare to its power. The vermilion bird bow. "We meet again." Fu Yao's sigh resounded in Xianxia's mind. "Master, what's going on?" This vermilion bird bow is a supreme spiritual treasure refined by the top cultivator of the distant past era's ice palace using the remains of the vermilion bird in the sacrificial temple. It's also the sect's cornerstone treasure. Fu Yao said, "Unfortunately, the disciples recruited by the ice palace all had water attribute spiritual roots and specialized in ice attribute cultivation techniques. Later on, the sect declined and no one could use this bow. This bow was enshrined in the underground palace, never to see the light of day." Xianxia was speechless. A sect famous for its ice attribute cultivation techniques actually refined such a supreme fire attribute spiritual treasure as the sect's cornerstone treasure. She really didn't know what to say. But even if it was someone else, a sect built on the vermilion bird sacrificial temple couldn't ignore the vermilion bird's divine power, right? Moreover, there were many talented cultivators in the distant past era. As far as she knew, there was a cultivation technique called the ice and fire technique. If one practiced this technique, using this bow wouldn't be a problem. "Master, did you want us to come here to take this treasure?" Fu Yao chuckled and said, "If this treasure could be taken away, why would the 5 of us keep it back then? To tell you the truth, the vermilion bird's divine power on this treasure isn't something we can control, so of course we can't take it away. Back then, we all tried, but none of us could resist the vermilion bird's breath. If we tried to resist it by force, we would get injured, so we could only give up in the end." Hearing this, Xianxia felt as if she was splashed with a bucket of cold water. But thinking about it, if they could take it away, they would have taken it a long time ago. "Then why did we come here?" Sensing her gloomy mood, Fu Yao smiled. "Isn't the vermilion bird's breath inside a treasure? I know you've had extraordinary encounters, so don't be too greedy. You obtained the Azure Dragon's bone long ago, so you already have the Azure Dragon's breath. Now that you've obtained the vermilion bird's breath and advanced to the nascent soul realm, you can create your own divine ability. Think about it. If you can refine the azure dragon's breath and the vermilion bird's breath and create your own divine ability, wouldn't that be terrifying? Just as they were talking, Mo Tiange saw Jing Xingji taking a step forward, so she hastily called out, "Fellow Daoist Jing." Jing Xingji turned his head and looked at her. "What's wrong?" Mo Tiange said, "The power of this thing is amazing. I'm afraid we can't take it away." Upon hearing what she said, Qin Shi, whose eyes were blazing, turned his head. "What's going on?" Mo Tiange sighed and relayed Fu Yao's words to them. She then said, "This treasure should have been refined by a cultivator whose realm far surpassed ours, so its power is amazing. However, the vermilion bird's divine power it carries is too powerful. It's not something we can control at our realm." "Spirit summoning magic weapon?" Qin Shi murmured. It was said in the cultivation world that the top-grade spiritual treasures had their own spirituality and were called spirit-summoning magic weapons. The power of such spirit-summoning magic weapons couldn't be compared to ordinary magic weapons. However, this kind of spirit-summoning magic weapon had long been lost. Even in the storehouse of this great ancient cultivation group, only a few spirit-summoning magic weapons could be found. In the past, spirit-summoning magic weapons only existed in legends. They never thought they'd be able to see one with their own eyes. "No!" Jing Xingji said resolutely, "No matter what, I have to give it a try. The spirit-summoning magic weapon is right in front of me, but I don't even try. I'm afraid I won't be reconciled for the rest of my life." Mo Tiange looked at Qin Shi and saw that his eyes were also filled with determination. She shook her head and said, "I understand your feelings. For us cultivators, spirit-summoning magic weapons are extremely tempting. I'll go get it first." Jing Xingji turned his head and said to them, "If I'm injured by the vermilion bird's divine power, I won't blame you even if you leave me here." Once he finished speaking, he no longer said anything. He took a step forward and reached his hand towards the vermilion bird bow on the altar. Buzz! A soft sound rang out. Before he could even touch it, the vermilion bird bow burst into flames. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.